Okay, everyone, it's 7:01. I'm, according to the clock up there, so I'm your acting chair tonight. So I'm going to call this meeting of the Planning and Transportation Commission to order. All right, so first we're going to establish a quorum, and we have 6 of 7 commissioners. We're missing Commissioner Samick at the moment. If he shows up late, we'll point that out. And moving on, we're going to open the meeting to comments for items that are not going to be covered later in the agenda. I seem to have 2 speaker cards for items not on the agenda. I'm going to call Wes Brinsfield first, and then I'm going to call Roberta Phillips. So, Wes, you'll have 3 minutes.
Thank you. I won't need 3 minutes. My name is Wes Brinsfield. I'm a member of the Los Altos Bicycle Pedestrian Advisory Commission. I am speaking on behalf of that commission tonight because I am the representative of BPAC to the PTC. We do send a representative to most PTC meetings, and so if you have any questions about BPAC that are relevant, I'll be here to answer those. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. With that, Roberta Phillips for an item not otherwise on the agenda.
Hi, Roberta Phillips. I've been a resident of Los Altos for 26 years. And I just wanted to speak to you generally about the things that are coming up in the future. I know you're going to be reviewing the CT zoning, the California density bonus laws, and Loyola Corners. And I really urge you, I think about, I see the world a little bit differently than you see the world. And I try to say to myself, how can I convince you, and I don't know, how I can convince you that there are many, many residents, 84% of the residents own their own homes here in Los Altos, and they really want our, commissions and our city council to protect us, to protect our way of lives, to protect our property values, to protect our privacy, to consider the implications of raising the building heights, of allowing less parking in certain areas, which will drive parking onto other parts of the town. I'm real concerned about that because I've only been here a couple of times, and I've observed, and I see things like, a developer gets up and says, well, let's raise the heights from 45 feet to 49 feet. Okay, let's do that. Without any kind of rationale behind why would you be doing that. Let's raise the elevator tower on top of the building to 15 feet 6 inches. And I'm going, are they trying to put a boat in the elevator? What are they trying to accomplish? And I'm missing that. I'm missing what it is that you're trying to accomplish, because I know that you guys are trying to create opportunities for more affordable housing. But I don't think that that's an excuse I think you need, to look at all the options, to follow what the state laws are. But I think that the other part of the consideration is you need to know that the residents here have always counted on our zoning laws and on our council and on our commissions to protect the lifestyle and the reason that we all moved here in the first place. And I speak to a lot of people who just moved here a couple of years ago, and it's the same reason I moved here 26 years ago. So please try to see both sides of issues. And I know Phoebe has tried to say that she's going to try to strike a balance. So I'm asking all of you, please try to strike a balance, because I certainly want to, and I hope that you people will be open-minded enough to find the right balance. Thank you.
Thank you, Roberta. And with that, that's the last card I had on public comment, so I'm going to close the public comment on items not on the agenda. All right, with that, let the record reflect that we have all 7 commissioners present. Commissioner Samick is here. And so if I turn to the right agenda, then our first item is a special item, the commission reorganization.
I nominate Sally Meadows to continue as chair.
I second.
Uh,
Because you have to accept first.
Well, I just wondered if there were, okay. I am honored and willing to serve if there's No other nominations or volunteers?
You're it. Tag, you're it.
Okay,
You have to vote.
so, yes, would the commission vote on the motion in front of us? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Keep the gavel.
Okay. All right, so I'm no longer acting, I guess. And then we need to nominate and move for a vice chair. Do I have any
I
nominations?
do. I'd like to nominate Phoebe
I
as
second.
vice chair.
Really fast.
And are you willing and able?
I'm willing.
All right, so do we have any discussion on that? Any other nominations? Okay, all those in favor, Commissioner Bresic as vice chair?
Aye.
Aye. All right, so we're unanimous on both items in our special item reorganization. Okay, so let's move forward then to our consent calendar. Our Planning and Transportation Commission minutes from the March 16th meeting. Is there any comments or discussion on them?
I do have a correction I'd like, in that Director Biggs mentioned that the corner of San Antonio and El Camino was differently zoned. When the previous meeting, we had thought that it was going to be incorporated in CT, and there was a little confusion about that, but I think the minutes should reflect that we no longer, you found the planning documents, and that zone is no longer being considered as part CT.
Okay, we can include something in the minutes to reflect that
Yeah, thanks.
clarification of the zone there.
Yeah,
In the PUD designation.
right.
I believe there's a name error in the public comment on page 2, that Mercia's last name is not Silva and will need to be corrected. And I know it's my brain. I'm just going to ask this. I thought that we talked about minimum side yard width of 4 feet, and we talked about averaging both.
Yes.
Okay? So I don't see the average aspect in this, in
We
the
can add that.
discussion part, or, so I believe that was something we talked about relative to allowing a variety on the sidewalls that we would lack otherwise.
I have the same recollection, yeah. Okay.
Capture that.
Any other comments on the minutes? I have one also, on page 2. The last bullet point under the discussion was to allow, as it says, elevator enclosures, et cetera. I think we really talked about allow elevator and stairwell enclosures to be as tall as minimally necessary. I just kind of reacted to it as written because tall as necessary sounds rather hard. So it's really tall as minimally necessary to accommodate the approved stairs or structure function as approved by staff.
Okay.
Okay, thank you.
Note that.
All right. So
Given those corrections, I move that we accept the minutes.
And I'll second that.
Okay, all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any abstentions?
I'm going to abstain because I was not a member of the commission at that time.
Okay, so we have 6 ayes and 1 abstention. So we have approved the minutes. So we're going to move on to public hearing on accessory dwelling units. So do we have a staff report?
Thank you. I'll be giving the staff report. I need to bring up my presentation. It's a brief presentation.
Okay.
It's on the desktop.
John, if you hit the bottom right corner, it'll fill the whole screen up. There's a little picture. It's next to the 90%. Over left. Keep going. Right where it says 90. No. See where it says 100%? It's right to the left of that? On that one. Nope. You had it. No, next that one.
That one.
Click. Oh, you got to cancel out of
This
that.
one, over on the far right. It's this one, right? Yeah.
There you go.
Something new all the time.
Okay, thank you. David Cornfield, Planning Services Manager, Advanced Planning. The topic before you is regarding accessory dwelling units. And what I'd like to do is explain a little bit about what they are, why they're important to the community, and why we're making changes to the ordinance. I'll briefly go over those changes and then invite your questions. You have my staff report, and I will be more succinct than that. So accessory dwelling units are second living units or granny units. They're also called au pairs and cottages. They're really an independent dwelling that's attached or detached to a principal single-family unit. They can be in multiple family districts as two, but in Los Altos we've limited them to single-family districts. Accessory dwelling units help us address the state and regional needs for affordable housing. They diversify our housing stock, allowing housing opportunities for small families, couples, friends, younger residents, seniors. They also are a good benefit to the neighborhood in general. They add eyes on the street. Sometimes these units are occupied when the principal unit's not, and that generally adds to security in the neighborhoods, also adds more community connections, if you will. And really, why we're here is the state changed the accessory dwelling unit law, and we need to amend the city's regulations to come in line with that. And really, the state's thrust is to streamline the process, and in this case, we used to call them second living units, and now they're accessory dwelling units. So part of this is going to be renaming them in our ordinances. But so if I use the term second living unit, I mean accessory dwelling unit. So the state wants us to reinforce the ministerial approval of these units. They're supposed to be administratively approved through an easy, quick process, and the recent changes to state law have reinforced that. The state also, in finding that these are a necessary and desirable housing type in the state, and some communities weren't really providing for them well, or they were providing a lot of limits for them. The state wants us to expand the capacity for these types of units. And then also, in doing so, the state has tied our hands a bit and has reduced the parking requirements we might require of a unit, and in some cases tied our hands in where these units can be located, such as above a garage. With a minimum 5-foot setback is allowed by the state, and so we have to allow that. The second reason we're doing this is we have a housing element policy. One of our many housing element policies with regard to affordable housing looks at accessory dwelling units as an important source of affordable housing for us, but recognizes that this community has limited the applicability of those to larger lots, and the policy, the housing element policy that we're considering tonight is whether we should lower the parcel size for these as a means to achieve more of them. And I should say this policy requirement was adopted in our housing element prior to the state determining that large lot sizes were an impediment, those types of restrictions. So we arrived at that idea before I think the state did. What we're proposing here is one of the main changes would be to reduce the required lot size from 13,000 for an integral unit, which is an accessory unit inside a principal living unit, and the 15,000 square foot threshold for a detached second living or accessory living unit, and lowering that parcel threshold size to 10,000 square feet as a means to expand the number of properties that these units can be applied for in our community. And 10,000 square feet is the minimum lot size for the city. So we have quite a few lots that are smaller than that, and there are concerns about how to actually manage the parking and additional household sizes on these kinds of parcels. And so from the staff perspective, we thought 10,000 square feet was a good threshold. We're removing the discretionary findings. We had some findings about the appropriate location of parking and design of double frontage lots and some other things, and we really can't do that. We have to have objective standards and apply them, and we cannot do design review, and we can't have any discretion. We have to allow them, but we can have objective elements of our code in terms of how we can achieve them, but we can't have these subjective findings, so we're removing those. We are adding a provision, or recommending a provision to limit the rental of these to terms of 30 days or more. Now, you don't have to rent an accessory living unit. They can be used for family and friends and au pair and what have you, but if they're rented on the Airbnb or something, what we're saying is these need to be rented for 30 days or more so that they are not so transient, and as a way of minimizing some of the impacts associated with these units. This proposed ordinance removes the affordability requirements. Our ordinance evolved over the years, and we required accessory living units to be limited to low and very low income households when they are rented as a means of achieving our affordable housing goals. Well, the state has determined that these types of units are intrinsically affordable, and we cannot put an affordable requirement on them. So we'll still get credit for them as affordable, and we don't have to regulate it, and so that we're removing those provisions in our code. We're also removing the occupancy limit. We limited these units to 2 person per household, and that is illegal. So we're removing that provision. As I mentioned earlier, there are some provisions that the state is requiring. We have to allow existing garages to be converted to accessory living units, and we have to allow accessory living units when they're located above an existing garage with a minimum setback of 5 feet. But we can put standards on these, and so one of the standards that we're recommending is that if we have one of these 2-story accessory living units above a garage, that it cannot have any windows facing the side property that are closer than to 17 and a half feet to the side or 25 feet to the rear, which is the standard for a single-family house, and that'll give us an ability to have some privacy for these types of units or for the properties adjacent to them. And then the other major change is reducing the parking requirements for these units. In some cases, we're not allowed to provide any parking for these units. When you're putting an accessory living unit in an existing structure, making no changes to no additions to a principal living unit or an accessory structure, we are not allowed to require parking. Also, if it's within a half mile of transit or in a historic district or some other things, we're not allowed to provide parking. But the ones that really would apply to our community are when they're converting the existing structures and then within a half a mile of a transit stop. The other is we are allowed to require no more than 1 parking space per unit or per bedroom for these types of units. And so given the state's desire to try and facilitate these and kind of balance that with managing the parking impacts, we're recommending that we require one space per unit as our basic requirement for the units that would require it, and this is what we're also thinking is the existing ordinance has treated parking for the main house and the second or accessory living units to be combined in a way that would maintain the single-family appearance of a property. And so our existing ordinance right now, if you have a two-car garage and a standard driveway, you meet the parking requirements for both the main house and the accessory living unit. Right now, our code requires one covered parking space and one uncovered parking space per unit. And so this has been working well for the community, where the principal living units can sort of repurpose their existing parking. And so we normally have two-car garages, which means there's two uncovered parking spaces in front of those garages. And so we usually have at least 4 parking spaces on a property. And so what we're recommending here is, even though the parking requirement's going down in its requirement by one space, it effectively probably won't change the parking that's provided normally on parcels. But if we're also providing in the ordinance, if somebody does want to create a separate parking space just for that unit, you can pave a space and do that in your front yard only. We do not want to see these parking spaces in the side yards or in backyards, where those parking spaces can be more of an impact to the adjacent properties with noise when they're starting cars up and so forth and driving down side yards. We just don't see that. We want to limit them to the front yard. We're also maintaining a great deal of the existing ordinance that we think is working for us. The 800 square foot size limit is a long-standing limit for accessory dwellings, and we a few years ago expanded that idea and restricted all accessory buildings to an 800 square foot limit. And so this essentially is a 2-bedroom unit, which has an effect of limiting the intensity of it. And so we're saying we should maintain that. We can allow up to a 1,200 square foot unit under the state's law. And I think the 800's been working well for the community, and we are not recommending above that. There's also a provision that would be new, that an accessory living unit cannot exceed half of the size of the principal unit. And that's generally not a problem in this community. The existing homes are usually larger anyway, but that is a requirement of the state, so we built that into our ordinance. We're maintaining the owner occupancy deed restriction, that the owner must reside on the property and keep this property as their primary residence, whether they live in the accessory living unit or the principal living unit. We think that's important. It's been important for this community to provide accountability for these types of units and minimize some of the impacts that might be associated if you know your landlord's right there. So I have to say, we really, in my 26 years here, I've received 4 complaints about accessory living units. So they haven't been a big concern in the community. And so I think part of it is this owner occupancy requirement. These units have to conform with our overall zoning regulations of floor area and lot coverage and heights and setback, except as limited by the state. We think that's important. Screening the entries from the street, we think, is important. Try and maintain, again, that single-family appearance of just one dwelling on the property. and then also requiring integral access. If you have a unit that's inside a principal residence, we think it's important to allow it to have, or require it to have an internal door to the main living unit so that it could be used both ways. So if it's not used as an accessory living unit, it could be used as part of the main house, or it can be locked off and be a separate unit. And we think that's important for providing the quality of the single-family units we have. And then finally, we're talking about, we can't change our administrative review of these units, but we have used our Design Review Commission and in the past our Architecture and Site Review Committee as a forum to review these units. And while we were not doing design review, it's providing public notice of these units for 12 or so property owners around these properties. And that's been our standard, and we evolved from, originally we required use permits for these types of units. They had a public hearing before the Planning Commission. They went to the City Council, and it was quite a hearing process. And the state years ago said, no, we can't do discretionary review. So we stopped doing use permits, and then we continued, though, using the committee level review process as a way of providing notice to the community. We're suggesting, though, at this stage, based on that, we really the regulations we have been working very well for the community. We really don't have a lot of complaints. The ones we have are easily resolved. That we think we can just administratively review these at the staff level just as effectively with the objective standards that we have. And in talking with applicants over the years, the public review process is an impediment. And just anecdotally, I would say at least 30-40% of the applicants that we see don't follow through with them because they don't want to go through the neighborhood review process. It's longer, it's sort of out in the public domain, and they just want to do their project and get a building permit. And we don't have very many accessory living units in the community. We only get half dozen a year at the most. This year, I think we've had 2. Last year, we had, I think, 3. And so we're just recommending that we just go to a purely staff level process here. And we reviewed this ordinance with the Design Review Commission. They've been reviewing these units for several years now and really wanted to get their input. They weren't unanimous on that, but that was one aspect that they disagreed with the staff on. They felt like we should keep the public review at the Design Review Commission level. And also the Design Review Commission felt like there was a way to maybe reduce the parking impacts with some other standards perhaps, and also perhaps look at incentives to provide covered parking for these types of units when they wouldn't normally be required. And so we explored that a little bit, and we didn't come up with a real straightforward way of doing that. For example, giving a floor area bonus for parking to provide covered parking, so you could say put that 200 square feet back into your main residence. There's nothing in our regulations that require people to use garages. There's 2-car garages now, and we think it would just be sort of a shell game, and we wouldn't really be necessarily achieving what I think the Design Commission was thinking in that instance. There might be other ways, and so we're definitely looking to the Commission and the public if there's other ways to try and incentivize providing covered parking. That could, I think, be a benefit, because I think there's 2 main issues in the community that I've perceived over the years. One is the parking impacts from these types of units, and then just the general idea of added density in neighborhoods. And unfortunately, the added density is not something we can address. The state has ruled accessory living units are the same as a principal single-family residence. So we can't address them from a density perspective. So that concludes my staff report, and I would be more than happy to answer your questions.
Okay, so do we have questions for staff, and should we start with
Sure.
Mike? Yeah.
So, David, you mentioned that the structures could be at a maximum of 800 square feet. Is there a limit to the number of structures that could be on the property? And I also heard you say there's 50% of the square feet. Is that for a structure, or is that the combined total of all the structures, if there were more than one?
So you can have more than one accessory structure on your property, but under our code, none of them can be over 800 square feet. You can only have one that's an accessory living unit, though.
Okay.
So, and then the 50% limit is for the principal house itself, living space only. So it would not count the accessory buildings.
Okay.
So, David, I have a couple questions. I think, one of the concerns that I hear is that, we have 9,400 parcels. If we open this up to 7,300, we're going to get this, just mad influx of people and cars. And what I want to have a better understanding of is, since this will only apply to people who haven't already maxed out or are close to maxing out their floor area, do we have a sense of how many of these parcels actually even have 800 square feet to put a structure like this?
It's a difficult question because you could, our experience has been when you build out a new house, they are maximizing the floor area and they're designing the floor plans that are very specific to their needs. And it's not very easy just to go in and carve out an accessory living unit within what they've already designed, or add on one because they've already exhausted their floor area. So we're not. I can't even think of a new residence that's been converted. Most of the time we see these is when new construction, they want to build it into it, and they've thought about that, or they're converting or adding to an existing home that's 2,500 square feet or something like that. So there's potential. So while we're looking at like tripling the number of properties that these could go on,
Right.
Our experience is there's really just not that many where the property owners want to do it. They have the floor area left, and so we're not seeing. We're not seeing that this is going to open up the floodgates and we're just going to have hundreds of these things now every year. I would love that if we had more units. That's the whole intent of this. But it also, though, we can, if let's say that we found this threshold, if it was too low and was inviting too many that was comfortable for the community, we could consider, readjusting the parcel size if we didn't get that right. But we have to strike a balance there because the state is going to be looking at these ordinances very carefully. In fact, we have to provide the state with our ordinance, and they're going to be tracking this with our housing element. And if we create an ordinance that doesn't really yield any more accessory dwelling units than we're already getting, they're going to look at that in our next housing element review. And we're going to have to grapple with it then. But so I'm not sure I'm answering your question at this point.
No, what I was asking, and I think what you've confirmed, is that to say that we have 7,300 parcels that are going to become eligible for this is a really artificially inflated number, because the vast majority of them simply don't have the capacity because they are already probably in the realm of, that they would have another 800. But the second part of what you were saying, and that was a follow-up question, about the number of people that actually utilize this currently. So from what I understood, only the parcels that are at 15,000 or higher currently are eligible to put these units on their space, right?
For a detached unit.
For a detached unit.
And 13,000 for an attached.
Right, so 1,500 was like 15% of our parcels, and the 2,500 parcels that were 13,000 was like, together, that was 27%. But you're saying only 50 units in some 20 years have been created.
That's right.
So that's like a infinitesimal amount. The people that are able to do it, only that small amount have actually taken advantage of it in all this time.
That's right.
You done?
Yeah.
So my understanding is that you could have an accessory structure, not an accessory dwelling structure, that is up to 800 square feet and has everything else that a dwelling unit has except for a kitchen, right? Is that the difference?
That tends to be the difference, yes.
Okay. And so many of these accessory structures out there are not counted towards our affordable housing, even though people go back and put in stoves, or they use it as a secondary dwelling unit, but not officially.
There are a lot of cottages that don't have kitchens that are used in a similar manner where people will dwell in
The
them.
microwave
But-
stove.
Eat in the main house or something, or may have been altered beyond what we allowed with permits. We enforce those when we find them. There's probably
But couldn't we?
a lot of those. in
Couldn't we
the
add
community.
those to our?
Well, we
affordable
could
housing?
under the new.
So now if
we lower the
okay.
threshold, a lot of these could be legalized
Okay.
for certain, and we would do a housing and building permit inspection and welcome them in.
Okay. So that's I think that would add quite a few to the numbers because it's already being done. Might as well make them count. And then the other question is the garage conversion at 5 feet. Does that mean there's no daylight plane or any kind of restrictions?
That's right,
you
because
just go
that's
straight
how
up?
I'm interpreting the state regulation, is that if we have to allow it with a 5-foot setback,
You just have a 20-foot
And-
wall at 5 feet.
and, and that's something that, so that's why we're saying,
No windows.
no windows. I'd say, some of these occur in sort of the carriage style where there's a little steeper roof pitch over a garage and it's sort of an attic style unit. But even that would not meet our daylight plane. The daylight plane for accessory structures is very restrictive.
Right.
And so we, essentially the state's regulation is trumping that.
Okay. Then, is the 800 square feet, is there flexibility to where with smaller lots we can have smaller units, and as you have larger lots, you can go up on that number? Can we do a 500 square feet for the?
We could consider a provision like that.
Okay, that's all.
That's all? Okay.
Thank you. I'm trying to, it seems like a lot of this is being dictated by the state. And so some of the things I'm just trying to understand, because in the exhibit that you provided, it talked about for attached ADUs, we actually can't set a limit, a minimum lot size. Right?
That's
JD, pardon me, isn't that the JDU?
Is this minimum lot
There,
size?
there are two types of these, and the junior accessory dwelling unit is not something that at least at this point, we're recommending that we provide. It's really a smaller version that's limited in its kitchen. You can't have gas. You can't have 220 voltage in it. And I think our view is, if you're going to do one of these, let's do it right and do a full kitchen and not have the issues associated with hot plates and microwaves and that kind of thing.
So it's on attachment C, page 9.
Yeah. I'll catch up to you here.
And in the top box, it's the third line down.
I mean, we can have, so your question is, if they're doing a conversion of an existing structure, is there a lot size minimum? There can be if we want it, for any accessory dwelling unit.
But it says here, minimum lot size cannot be applied to ADUs within existing structures. I read that as, you can't say there's a minimum lot size if you're doing a junior ADU, because the building already exists and you're not adding to it.
No, excuse me, that is correct. I'm confusing the two units. That's right, that is an important distinction, that if you are converting an existing structure,
Within it.
there's no lot minimum.
So our
That is-
non-conform, we occasionally have non-conforming lot sizes, which are less than 10,000.
Right.
And if someone had a house on that, where there was the inclination and the possibility of converting part of it to what's called a junior ADU, which would have limited cooking facilities, but would be a bedroom, a bathroom, and probably a living space, that could be on a legal non-conforming lot size for our town.
It could be.
I think we have a regular one. This isn't restricted to ADUs.
No, it says within existing structures. That's the third line.
But this isn't for ADUs. This is for plain.
This radius, right? That's
Yeah.
all I'm saying is if we're going to try to get it right to comply with the state,
I think that's what this
we just need to figure that part out because
Yeah, we can,
It
I think we should
seems-
probably clarify the proposed ordinance on
because
that.
it seems like it's the differentiation is you can perhaps apply a minimum lot size to a detached
Yeah.
unit, but not to one that's attached.
I have to say, I'm only making
I'm not
comments
sure.
out of, because I was just going
Right.
through this with the Palo Alto public hearings, and it was my understanding that attached accessory dwelling units, where an addition was made to the existing house, was a different category in terms of limitations that could be applied than for a junior ADU, where no additional space was added to an existing structure.
Where you're just
In
carving
which
it out of
case,
the
you're carving out of the existing,
Mhm.
and for that one, basically, anything goes.
Yeah.
Because it wasn't inherently, my understanding is in the state ruling, it wasn't inherently changing anything. And it was a specific, it was this very specific, the one that said you can't have full cooking facilities. Because it was definitely meant to be a limited function within an existing house. And I don't believe that anything goes limitation applies to ADUs where you are adding to the existing house, and staff will have to clarify.
That's our understanding. If you're adding on, you have to conform with the community standards.
Right.
And then the other question I had was in that same section, it's talking about the that there's still architectural and landscape requirements and kind of a review for those, and that's what you're suggesting be done at the staff level as opposed to.
The compatibility standards, yes.
And my other question was around, I'm confused because the state is saying that 800 square feet is affordable by design. But we have.
By
I
definition.
mean, right, but we create, less than 800 square foot apartments all the time that don't count towards our affordability requirement. And so, is the state mandating that we remove, I would assume that, what's the, I guess, thinking behind removing the affordability component? Is that a state mandate, or is that
That's the state mandate.
the state mandates that you cannot require them to be affordable?
It may have been related to the Costa-Hawkins Act, where we're not allowed to limit rental income for property owners, which was getting some communities in trouble with their affordable housing ordinances, where we would require rental units and require some of them to be affordable. And it's referred to as the Palmer case as it's going through the courts. I think that was part of it. But I think the other part were onerous deed restrictions on these were an impediment for property owners to build them.
My other question was around parking in 14.14.060. It's on page 5. In D, in an area requiring on-street parking permits, but they're not offered to accessory dwelling unit occupants, that's where I guess you can't require parking.
Right,
No parking
that's
has-
out of the state law, and
R-
we don't have a district like that, but we could. So I just included it.
So if you had a district that required parking permits, right, you can't require them to provide parking, but those parking permits aren't provided to the accessory dwelling units. So how does,
That's,
where do they park?
I think that was an attempt by some cities to prevent the creation of accessory dwelling units. It was just a workaround, and the state got wind of that, and so that's why they put this language in the code, so that you could no longer say, oh, your neighborhood requires parking permits, or your neighborhood requires parking permits, but we're not going to provide them for accessory dwelling units, therefore
Got it.
you can't put in an accessory dwelling unit, unless you provide the parking on site. But if
Okay.
the code doesn't require the parking on site, then it was kind of a catch-22 for those property owners.
That's all my questions.
A lot of mine were answered already, so I'm delighted. How would we enforce the 30-day limit, or 30-day minimum, I should say, for accessory dwelling units if we have, for about 2 years, been hearing a lot of pushback in our community and adjacent communities about abuses by Airbnb? I understand that the concept of having the owner on property makes a lot of that go away, but how do you know if someone's there for 30 days or less?
It's by complaint.
Okay.
We wouldn't know just.
But let's say you got a complaint. What's your enforcement mechanism?
We would, I think, have our code enforcement officer contact the property owner and ask to see their rental lease.
But then,
And
my point is, you can't say, we're going to take away your accessory dwelling unit.
Right. Well, we'd flag it and
Okay.
watch them. Yeah, and I think that's a good question about enforcement. Definitely, we don't. And that's kind of where we were with providing incentives for covered parking. We have no way to really enforce the use of a garage. So
Which we know.
It's a fine line between regulating and enforcement.
I guess we could take it to take the legal route, because what it would be is an improper use of the property. The zoning code allows certain types of uses, and if you're conducting a use not in compliance with zoning, then that becomes something we would want to see corrected. And if it doesn't get corrected, then we would take it to the next level, possibly citations or taking it to court in some manner.
So we do have recourse. That's
We
what I
do
wanted
have
to
recourse,
find
yeah.
out.
I think the zoning code gives us that opening to say you need to conduct a use on your property that is in compliance with the zoning code.
Actually, because I was very amused to see the two-person limit lifted, because I always thought that was almost unenforceable. So someone has a baby, and you say, sorry, you got to get out of there.
gone, right.
Bad thoughts. So this was a good one that got picked up. About paving the front yards for a space, if you have an accessory dwelling unit, what if it's a corner lot? Would you allow the paving on either of the street faces?
The way this is written, no, just on the front yard.
Okay. I wanted to just clarify from my own sense that if someone were to convert a garage that was 5 feet from the property line, not put a second story on it, but convert it, 400 or 600 square foot of it, to a living unit, the property would still have to provide replacement parking to meet our parking requirement, in addition to the one space that would be required for the ADU. So you'd have to have one covered, one uncovered for the main, and then one uncovered for the new ADU. Is that correct? If it was a garage conversion?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. And then the other thing I wanted to ask is, supposing the garage was only 2.5 feet from the property line, because detached accessory structures are allowed literally 0 setback on 2 sides, rear and side, aside from it being a fire hazard, could you convert that to an ADU?
The way we've designed the ordinance is you can only convert a conforming structure.
Okay.
So.
But wait a minute. But the garage is conforming. It's a.
Well, now garages have to be a minimum 2.5 feet, but oftentimes, based on the daylight plane, they have to be set back more from the property line.
So there's an example of where it's not, you can convert garages nilly-willy. They have to meet some minimum standard.
Yeah, and what we're doing here is really applying two different
I found that a little
concepts,
confusing, so.
And we could clarify that, but the intent is, under permitted uses, 14.14.20 subsection C, conversion of an existing accessory structure provided its location is in conformance with present setback regulations.
Okay, and has side and rear setbacks that are sufficient for fire safety, so if you're within 5 feet, you have to have a 1-hour rating on those walls.
So our intent there is you can't even get to the garage conversion unless it's a conforming accessory structure. If it's a garage in the principal residence, that's another thing.
Okay.
Those generally conform.
Okay. All right, that's all from my questions. Thank you.
Come back to parking for a second. With paving, does that to provide the additional unit parking place? Does that still require or come under the limit of no more than 50% of the yard being paved?
Yes, we have an overall paving
That doesn't
limit
change.
of 50% for the front yard.
That doesn't-
Mike, your mic, Anita.
Oops, sorry.
Got it.
Thank you, sorry. Then, in the conversions that we've done, how many have been external buildings that you're aware of in the last few years?
You talk about converting accessory
Accessory structures.
Accessory structures.
Out exterior, detached structures.
Not many. I can't think of one that's been converted. They've, in my recollection, over the last, I'd say about 10 years, they've been new structures that were designed just for the second living unit.
Okay, because I'm with this becoming ministerial review, obviously it's really critical that the ordinance we do cover all the possibilities, and there's so many things, that little nuances that I have. I mean, I have like 15 or 16 questions here that I'm not going to go through, but if we were to, because of this, and because of the ministerial review, might encourage more people to come forward, as you were talking about, and try to do conversions, and as the Commissioner was talking about. I think we have the possibility of getting a lot more uproar where we have separate structures, such as pool houses and things like that, that sit well within the normal 10-foot side setback, for example, or well within the 25-foot rear setback, where we will have our residents up in arms about converting those units. They're already unhappy that those types of units.
Can we, I'm just going to interrupt. We're trying to get clarification questions right now, so we save
I'm trying
this
to understand if those kind of units, is there a way in the state law where we can avoid converting those units, or are we compelled to convert those units?
We would be compelled to convert those, and I would point out that what you're describing are conforming accessory structures.
Yeah, but they're for non-residential currently.
Right, but there's no difference, really. Our existing regulations allow detached accessory living units in the same location as the conforming pool house.
Okay.
So what we're talking about is the use is different. The location standards and height standards.
Wait a minute. What do you mean the use is different? You said
Well-
it's the same. You just said it's the same.
The location and design of the structures tends to be the same. It's just whether it's a pool house or an accessory living
Right,
unit.
exactly.
is
Yeah, the use is different. Yeah.
But they're both habitable spaces.
They're both habitable, they both meet the same setback, daylight plane, height
Right.
standards.
Right. Okay, just wanted that
So,
clarification.
Sleep there during the day instead of.
And then there's a mention about mechanical lifts in parking in the state law. Is there a way we can avoid allowing mechanical lifts in residential areas?
They are structures, so they are not, by definition, they would not be allowed in a front yard. So if somebody wanted to convert part of their existing garage into a mechanical parking, that's fine, inside a structure.
Do we have anybody who's got
Yes.
a mechanical in a house?
Oh, we do.
Oh, yeah.
We have dozens.
I know 3 personally.
Yeah,
Basement garages.
yeah. You-
With turntables, so you don't have to
Yes.
turn the car.
Yeah.
It's
People with collecting cars and.
Okay. That's
That's
my question.
all for now? Okay. Well, actually, the good thing about going last is most of your questions get answered. I must admit, it was a little confusing to me to determine what we have flexibility with and what is required. So it seemed to me from what you laid out and what I read that actually our determination of the lot size that can take this is flexible. I mean, there's an intent to the states or doing this and to our doing it, but we still have flexibility in determining the lot size. Is that correct? Okay. And we also have flexibility, it sounded like, in setting the maximum size of these ADUs. Because you
can set
said
the maximum size, yes.
or yeah, okay. So, but some of the other things that weren't flexible, then you've taken care of in the language of the proposed ordinance change, okay. And then I was curious about the potential ADU being put above a garage. So, anytime in this town that anything goes to 2 stories that isn't already goes to review, whether it's design review for a single-family home or something else that comes here. So I don't understand why a second story to be put on a garage wouldn't still be allowed to be reviewed. Why is that just acceptable?
That is an exception, and I didn't clarify it in my presentation, but the intent is that if an accessory dwelling unit permit required another level of review, such as 2-story design or a variance or something, then it would go to that body, would not be administrative.
Okay, so it's not, so a 2-story ADU to be built on a garage is not just approved administratively, that's what
Right,
you're saying?
that would be, because it's, the 2-story construction has to go to the Design Review Commission by process.
So it's an objective
It would
standard.
go,
Okay.
but they can't apply design review standards to it.
It's not design review,
It's
but it's a
process.
yeah.
Process to apply the standards we have.
And then daylight plane does apply to that or not? Because that's what I thought you
No.
said, it
Yeah,
doesn't apply to that, okay.
It just can't.
But then you have no control.
Well, that's the thing that David was saying about
Yeah.
not having windows on the 2 sides that face adjacent neighbors.
Right.
Because that's an objective control that we could put on.
Right, okay, so it goes to the commission, but they can't turn it down just because it's a
Ugly.
2-story addition
Right.
on a garage, is the bottom line?
Right.
Okay.
That's right.
All right, so I think I think that answers my questions, and
I had one. Where did you
One
get this
more?
great photograph of
Yeah, this
questions?
a tiny
have to have a
round
little
here.
fun.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so with that, then we're going to open public comment on this item. Are there a couple more cards?
Madam Mayor, I mean,
Madam Mayor.
Madam Chair,
Promoted, Sally.
Boy, I got promoted twice in one night.
while you're calling up the public, I just wanted to note for the record, we did have 3 letters that were submitted subsequent to our staff report. One for them, and you have copies on your dais. I just wanted to mention for the record, the League of Women Voters submitted a letter largely in support of the regulations. Mr. Wing submitted a letter with some concerns about using maybe minimum lot frontage requirements and some shoulder paving concerns. And then the Gillens submitted a concern about allowing them on smaller parcels. So
Okay. thank
you have those for the record.
Yes, thank you. Okay, so we're going to open public comment now, and I've shuffled up the deck of cards here. I'm going to call you in no particular order, and I'm going to let you know, Mary, we're going to start with you, and then the next person, so you can be ready to zip in after Mary's done. We're going to do 3 minutes comment, is Cheryl Riker, so if I have the name right. Okay.
Mary Skugard, a longtime resident of Village Court area on Roma Lane. I just wanted to say that I think David Cornfield did a very thorough and thoughtful evaluation of this subject. Los Altos is a family residential community, and this type of structure, I think, is perfect for the people who care about Los Altos, the teachers, the government workers, the caregivers, the seniors, and the families of the people who currently live there. I do not see any major problems with the way it's been presented and the items that they have said, and I hope that you will adopt it. Thank you.
Thank you, Mary. Okay, Cheryl?
Followed by.
What?
Followed by.
Oh, Cheryl, followed by, thank you, Pat Marriott.
Hi, my name's Cheryl Riker, and I've lived in Los Altos for 20 years. First of all, I wanted to say I do appreciate many of the facets of the proposal. I'm glad you're keeping the 800-foot maximum dwelling size. The owner occupancy rule, I think, is very helpful. And I also do like the fact that there's going to be hopefully a 30-day minimum rental that can be enforced. I've read a lot in the Crier about the terrors of people in Los Altos Hills and the Airbnb rentals. However, I do have some concerns and I guess requests. I noticed in the text that the entire section about neighbors had been struck through. So I got the impression that the focus was really on people who wanted to build these units and didn't really care so much about those who might be impacted by them if their neighbors built one. So I would like to have some consideration, maybe if one is built in our neighborhood, that we could increase the fence height if our privacy is impacted. For parking, many of our homeowners already today can't even get into their garages. They're 2-car garages. I heard some people talking recently about not even getting one car in the garage. I don't want people coming in and parking in front of my house. So whether there are parking requirements, the people in their homes should have to park in front of their house or in their garage or in the driveway, not on the neighbor's property, so that we can't have visitors, we can't park in front of our house, we can't have workers come to our house without parking down the street. Also, I want to make sure there's some kind of height limit. We talked about the garages, but what would stop someone from who has currently a 1-story house from building a small 2-story detached dwelling? The design review should be met with keeping it consistent with the neighborhood, with the look and feel of the house that is already there. If there's some kind of manufactured property, I saw some documentation about that. It should also be kept in the same character of the existing structure. And there was some discussion about manufactured units. That's fine, again, as long as they're kept within the style of the existing structure. And that's about it. Thank you.
Thank you. Pat, followed by Jim Wing.
Hi, Pat Marriott from Oakhurst Avenue. I do think this is a really complex subject, and David did a good job, and he answered some more questions for me that I asked him online about FARs. I do think that maybe, as the Design Review Commission suggested, we start out with 12,000 square feet instead of 10,000. I think David said earlier that we could do 10,000, and then maybe if we changed our mind, we could build it up. But I think it's easier to start at 12,000 and then go down, as opposed to starting at 10,000 and then having to fight and say, no, we're going to be a little bit tougher on that. I would also like to suggest maybe longer than 30 days for the rental, because there are tons of horror stories about Airbnb. A lot of Europeans get 4 or 5 weeks vacation, and so 30 days, maybe we could move it to 60 days. David mentioned that we have more security because we have additional eyes, and that's probably true if we know who's living in the ADU. But if there are some Airbnb strange people, maybe it's a little bit less security. So I know there was an article in today's Mountain View paper about Airbnbs. Right now they're illegal in Mountain View, but Mountain View has said, well, we have to do something about it, and maybe we look to other cities to see what they're doing. And I think that's something that we have to jump on as well, because a lot of people want to make some extra money. I don't really think we should allow Airbnb rentals in residential neighborhoods. Thank you very much.
I have a question for you, Pat. I didn't understand your point. Could you clarify? So you're saying the proposal is that be a 30-day minimum rental, and you're saying it should be a
60.
longer than 30-day minimum rental in order to what goal?
Well, the Airbnb thing. I'm assuming that's why we had the 30-day minimum.
And that was to have people not be able to come for a week or a weekend.
Right.
But you don't
I'm
think
saying
30 days?
People could come for a month as a vacation Airbnb rental.
So you're saying if it was longer than that, it would preclude doing more people in Airbnb doing it?
I would think so. I would
Okay,
hope so.
that's what I needed to understand. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Pat. Jim? And Jim will be followed by Gina Greenan.
I'm Jim Wing, a 48-year resident of Milverton Road. I understand that the state has a lot of controls, but there may be some wiggle room in terms of what their controls are. First of all, on parking. Parking really is a problem. In my neighborhood, we have several second living units. And if you go home tonight and you try to drive down Sheridan, Lee, parts of Palm, Washington, you're going to find there's completely filled with street parking, some in parallel, and those streets are now one-way streets or one-lane streets. So with a lot of accessory units, there is a side effect, and that is parking. But for many of our neighborhoods, we have landscaping which comes out to the pavement edge. But we do have a shoulder paving policy. And if that could be, which does include street parking all in the city right away, that could be as one of the requirements for adding a new accessory unit on or dwelling on the property. That would ensure parking on the streets. And also keep in mind that we have a lot of narrow lots on there. For instance, and this goes back to the ratio, the landscaping has to be 50%. That should be, if that can be enforced and the state doesn't override that, then basically a lot of narrow lots will have trouble meeting any type of parking requirements. A 70-foot wide lot of a spec home that's being built right now, they had to tweak the driveway to be able to meet the 50% ratio and keep the hardscape at 50% and the landscaping at 50%. Some people have taken out circular driveways because that pushes you on the narrow lots below 80 feet, that pushes you up into the 60% hardscape. You take them out and you're back into the 40s or 30s. So the front yard landscaping ratio is critical and critical to maintaining the streetscape character of our neighborhoods. Thank you.
Thank you, Jim. Now Gina, followed by Les Poltrack.
If I can interrupt, David, I had a quick question. So hardscape is non-pervious paving or paving of any kind?
Hardscape is
So you could have a driveway that's pervious paving, and it would not count against the 50%?
well, partially not.
Oh, you give some credit for it, but not full credit?
If we could find a way to count.
Okay.
50%.
Pavers and sand.
Yeah.
We tend to just count as a paved way because it's just such a small difference.
Okay.
And they have to be installed very
Okay.
carefully to actually have the permeability. So we'll use our judgment. And if somebody's really doing something that's meant to be pervious and it's got all the design requirements, then we would consider that.
Thank you. Excuse me, Jeannie, thank you for waiting.
Thank you. Good evening. Thank you all for your service to the community. And thank you to Mr. Cornfield for all your work in this effort. I acknowledge the need to comply with state rules in cleaning up the language. That's all great. But I am very, very concerned about the proposed lowering of minimum parcel size for accessory dwelling units. Especially with the removal of a two-person occupancy limit. This will inevitably lead to increases in population density, traffic on our roads, number of cars crowding our driveways and our roadsides, shortage of parking downtown, and crowding our schools, which is a large concern for the city right now. Adding more people means more kids in school, and nothing in the changes that are proposed provide any funding to respond to any of these concerns in our community. Additionally, the removal of the limit to affordability requirements will strongly accelerate the incentive for property owners to turn their properties into rental opportunities, which really results in the commercialization of our residential neighborhoods. A rise in the interest in ADUs will also increase an increased burden on the city. This has been mentioned. There'll be more applicants for ADUs, and processing of these applications and design and review will place a greater burden on the city resources. And I also worry about the city being able to enforce these units, enforcing owner occupancy of the primary unit or of either of the units on each parcel, and also not allowing Airbnb type uses of the properties. I'm very, very concerned about that. All of these factors combined create a real threat to the character of our community. In addition to the issues of crowding, I noted these changes will likely result in an increase in the ratio of renter-occupied vis-a-vis owner-occupied residencies, more renters rather than owners, more turnover among our residents, less continuity and less commitment to our community. I'd just like to point out that our so-called housing shortage is not a one-sided equation. There is an imbalance between housing and jobs in the region, and that's led to higher housing prices in the area. And, there's a generosity of spirit in the community to help our teachers, our firefighters, the homeless. But these units wouldn't be reserved for them. They would simply pack more people into an already stressed infrastructure and further degrade our quality of life here in Los Altos. De facto rezoning is not fair to current residents and has the potential to destroy our character of our town. Rather, I urge you to seek targeted solutions that incorporate intelligent development.
Thank you, Gina.
Of new housing units near retail and transportation.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Les Poltrack.
Hi, I'm Les Poltrack. I live at 164 Dow Drive, which is over near Almond Elementary, near the high school also. My lot's about 19,000 square feet, so I'm not particularly concerned about the size, but I definitely would consider building a accessory dwelling unit, so I wanted to give you my perspective from someone who would consider it. I do think this is important, and I hope you're successful. Parenthetically, I would be fine with public review. I mean, I would intend to talk to my neighbors anyway. I don't see it as a problem. Parking, personally, I'd probably build one covered and one uncovered anyway. I don't really find the arguments about people not using their garage persuasive, because you can make that argument about 4,000 square foot houses too. So setting those aside, I think, the frequently asked question number one from the state was, should ordinances encourage the building of these units? And I just want to talk about two specific parts of the proposed ordinance that are problematic to me personally anyway. One is 1440-050D, which is about entrances having to be screened from the street. In my case, I have a pretty wide lot, and the right place to build something would be like in the side yard. And if I had like covered parking, you'd probably see the entrance from the street. So I don't want to build something I need to hide, and I've actually worked on dozens of houses in the last 13 years for Habitat for Humanity, and I don't think we should have people living somewhere that we need to hide. So anyway, that's that one. And the other one is the deed restriction, which I think is pretty problematic. I know the state allows it, but in their model ordinance that they had in the document, they didn't have that particular thing. I sold a house in Los Altos about a year and a half ago, and I sold it to someone who's an executive at a big company. He happens to have a principal residence in another state. And, in a lot of the demographic here, I'm not sure it's represented tonight, there are people who will transfer to Asia for 5 years or go to LA and run a company and, et cetera, et cetera. And basically you're telling me, houses will be resold. So when I bought my property, there was no deed restriction saying that, this had to be my principal residence. So, if you're going to put a legal restriction, that might be a deal killer for me. Because basically you're telling me, well, down the road, whoever sells your house, you or your kids, you're limiting the market for that house. Now, I think that's really problematic. So just, 140450D and 14070C, just from my perspective, are problematic. Thanks.
All right, thank you. Les, I think I forgot to mention that Autumn Hancock is going to be next. Did I neglected that. And then Roberta Phillips, I've slipped you in after Autumn, so hi.
Good evening, everybody. I'm a native Los Alton. 67 years ago, my parents bought 35 apricot trees near El Monte and built their dream house. Fast forward about 3 decades, I'm a Los Altos elementary school teacher, and then starting in the 90s, I couldn't afford to live in Los Altos any longer. I've lived up and down the peninsula, San Carlos, Redwood City, even East Palo Alto. And my life was saved 15 years ago when I found a shack in the back, a backyard near the Rancho Shopping Center. And I was so thrilled because, believe it or not, at that time I made too much money as a teacher to afford your affordable housing program. There's not a place in there for a single gal with a 14-year-old cat. I would have had to have some kids. So I was so thrilled that I met this wonderful couple at a below-market rental. They support education, and I even tried to up my rent a few times. I'd throw in a few extra $100 and they would refuse it. I was just grateful, and I had a fabulous community. I think when you rent to a public servant, you get more than just a neighbor. I looked in on my 100-year-old neighbors, kids. I found people's dogs wandering around. I loved my street. And sadly, my shack in the back was taken away a few months ago because the mother-in-law it was originally built for came over from France at 92 years old and moved in, as she should have. And I'm displaced again. I'm out of the city. I'm still teaching here, hoping to come back. And I just wanted to make a couple comments about parking. we had, my landlords had a 2-car strip in front of their house, like their driveway, and then we had a paved area that could fit about 3 cars. And frequently I could not park in front of our house because the neighbors in the neighborhoods, many of them, they're multi-generational homes. Lots of adult children live with their parents, and then they had boyfriends and girlfriends. So often I couldn't get my little spot out of the 3 in front of our house. And that's just the way it was. And, you learn to live with it. So I just wanted to throw that out there. I guess that's only one thing I wanted to say about parking. Anyway, thank you for listening and for having this fabulous idea. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Autumn. Okay, Roberta, followed by Sue Russell.
So just a couple of questions. So I don't know if you looked at, there's a lot of properties in Los Altos are on flag lots. And I wonder if, David, if you address that at all, because a lot of times it's a shared driveway. And when you have an additional unit, and I know it may sound silly, but it's garbage pails. Because I happen to live on a flag lot, and my neighbors are great, I love them. But on Fridays, I have my 3 cans, and they have their 3 cans, and you can't get in and out of the driveway. And I think there are a lot, because we were obviously apricot groves, or other kind of groves at one point. How do you intend to address those issues of the flag lots? And I guess you can answer when I'm finished. And the second thing is I do think that there should be public review. I don't see any reason not to have a public review on this. I think that neighbors are impacted, and most of the neighbors try to be good neighbors, but sometimes you have people who take advantage. And I think that if you live next to somebody or behind somebody, you should have a right to speak up. That just seems awfully democratic to do that. The third thing I want to say was I would like to see 12,000 square feet be the minimum, because you could always lower it, but it would be certainly really difficult to go in the opposite direction. So I'd like to see it set at 12,000 feet. And the only other thing I want to say is, I hear the story all the time, teachers and firemen. Well, 99% of the time, they do not qualify for low-income housing because they make too much money. And, it sounds like a really good argument, but unfortunately it just isn't reality. So anyway, David, have you addressed the flag lot situations at all, and the shared driveways?
So,
and the garbage?
So we'll take that into our discussion periods.
Okay, great. I appreciate that. It's just,
Yeah.
as long as you're going to do, you might as well look at all the situations. We have a lot of them in town.
All right. So Sue, followed by our final speaker will be Suzanne.
I assume you've all had my letter, so I don't want to repeat it. I think the staff report did a great job of capturing the intent of the new California state law to encourage ADUs and to help us with the affordable housing crisis that we have here. Mountain View recently decided that there should be no minimum lot size, as have many other cities, and I'm sorry I didn't clip the article that was in the paper, but there was a recent article in The Voice that I think said that they changed their law back last June, and they've only had 5 applications, even though they have no minimum lot size. But it's something to that effect. There has definitely not been a deluge of applications, and it's partly because you still have to follow all the typical zoning requirements, and it's not that easy. Other cities that have not gone with no minimum lot size have typically gone with significantly smaller than the 10,000 that's being recommended here. And I also wanted to say that most of the other cities have gone with the parking requirements that the staff has recommended. And I just wanted to comment on this last thing. In order to move into one of these, one of the advantages really is you don't have to qualify for a typical BMR, so it does open up opportunities for people like the teacher or someone else that's looking for something.
Yes, thank you, Sue. So now Suzanne, and Suzanne, your last name isn't on here, so if you could tell us that too.
Good evening. Thank you for the opportunity to speak. I'm Suzanne Ambiel. I am on the Bicycle Pedestrian Advisory Commission, but tonight I am speaking for myself. I just want to raise a couple of issues to the commission tonight. BPAC is frequently challenged when we try and implement bicycle pedestrian projects within the city due to the constraints of our narrow streets. And one of the biggest pushbacks we get whenever we're proposing these projects is on-street parking. For many of our residents, that on-street parking is a right, not a privilege. And the owners on that street feel that that is their piece of parking, even though it actually is city property and they are storing private property at no cost on city property. But time and time again, our projects have been turned back due to the residents saying, but where am I going to park my car? Even though they do have a 2-car garage and they have a driveway, they still say, I need to have that space in front of my house available for me to park my cars. And so we're constantly thwarted as we try and implement pedestrian or bicycle projects throughout the city. So I just urge you to think about that as you add ADUs, which will then further stress that parking apron, if you will, that only available place we have to put a bicycle or protected bike lane. And then finally, I would ask that as you consider this going forward, whether it's a 10,000 or a 12,000 square foot, have the city provide you with a heat map. Where would most of this potential lie? In what neighborhoods? On what streets? And what would the potential impact be on traffic and parking in those areas? Is it overburdened in one neighborhood versus another, or is it equally spread so it wouldn't feel as heavy-handed on one street versus another? So I'd urge you to have an opportunity to take a look at that ecosystem impact, if you will, of a 10,000 or 12,000 foot limit. So those are my comments tonight. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. So that's the end of the green card, so I'm assuming we're ready to close public comment. Thank you for all who spoke. Okay, so we'll move on to commission discussion. Who would like to start? Anita, you have 14 more questions.
Can I just ask a couple quick questions of staff? How do we identify units that are being done as interior units, like a house comes in, someone's going to scrape the existing house and build a new house? It's easy to put one of these in, and how do you identify it, and how does it get counted for our NRHA thing?
Well, we identify them when we're working with our residents on their house plans. They usually are showing their intention of either having an accessory unit or not, and it's clear from the floor plans whether they want to do it. And in a lot of cases, we have to inform them they don't meet our threshold of 13,000 square feet to include it in their residence. And so we work with them to modify their design so they meet our...
What is it we can stop them from doing if they want to put something in the basement that's got a bedroom and a kitchenette and an extra bathroom down there, and it's got exterior access plus a shared wall? How do we tell them you can't build that?
We regulate it through our planning authority.
It's the kitchen. They can forbid them.
You're creating a separate dwelling, and so we flag that in our review.
So you forbid the kitchen, or you forbid some element?
Yeah, a lot of times it does come down to a kitchen, but it's also an entrance, it's a bedroom, it's a bathroom, it's a living area. And so, I mean, having a second kitchen by itself is not always the concern, because sometimes we have sort of executive homes, I'll say, where they have a butler's pantry, which is essentially a second kitchen, but in its configuration,
basement bar,
it's not a dwelling. Same thing, we have recreation rooms where they have a wet bar.
Right.
That's not a kitchen either. And so we use our judgment and look at these.
The only other question I have is, since we're talking about changing the application of this ordinance to potentially other lots than we've had right now, is there a notice requirement in the city to notify broadly? You know, if we were to move this to 10,000, application to 10,000 square feet, you're covering the vast majority of the city. Is there some notice requirement broadly for our residents that this is being considered?
Yes, and we've done
what is that? What is it?
It's an ad in the general newspaper. When we have a zoning regulation that might affect more than 1,000 properties.
Thank you.
We are required to do a newspaper ad.
And was one of those done before tonight, or is that something that would
Yes,
happen down
it's
the road?
published 10 or more days ahead. Normally, we're on the town crier paper schedule, which is about a 14-day or 15-day notice.
And we usually receive, it was probably before you joined, but we receive notice that they're posting something in the paper, so you'll see those in the future.
Okay, yeah, because I didn't see
Yeah,
anything, and I
right.
thought.
No, yeah.
Thanks.
I think you should let Anita go last. It's her first public hearing.
Well, I knew she had some questions, so I wanted to
understood
give her
that.
that chance. All right, so
I
then
appreciate your
we'll
patience
look.
with me.
Who would like to go first, Ish?
All eyes are looking at me. I guess that's me.
All right.
I have some
Always fun to look.
comments that I heard during public comment that I'd like to get staff's opinion on. One is the height of the structure. Is there anything that limits, if it's a one-story structure and they decide to put in an ADU but make it 30 feet high?
No, our overall zoning applies. So 27-foot height limit for the main house, two-story. If it's an accessory structure, it's limited to 12 feet in height or up to 18 if it's architecturally compatible.
Okay.
So that's where we're looking at maybe guiding people if they're going to do the cottage above the detached garage, some sort of a sloping roof that would be within the 18 feet and meet that regulation.
So I know that we have a lot of one-story neighborhoods, and as I remember, you couldn't build a two-story home if the majority of the one-story property, or majority of the homes were one-story properties, right?
Well, if the single
If
story.
the zoning otherwise prohibits it, like the single-story overlay district, you
Yeah.
could not do a two-story addition there.
Okay.
So there are some areas.
Objective standards.
So that trumps, the overlay trumps the state requirements.
We
So you,
think.
you couldn't put the second-story garage on in a single-story overlay.
I don't think so, no.
And then another question I had, the intent of the ADUs is to have people stay there for long periods of time. So wouldn't it make sense to make the rental period like 6 months or a year? I mean, to me, that seemed like we're trying to get people to be teachers or, people that work in the area. We want to stabilize that area so there's not this constant turmoil. Or turnover, I should say, not turmoil, but turnover.
That's something we'd want to explore with our city attorney. There's some restrictions on, it ties back to interstate commerce and prohibiting or limiting the people's ability to freely move about or between state lines. And so there might be some limitations on actually being able to go much beyond 30 days, but we'd have to explore that again with the city attorney if you wanted to have us pursue that.
Yeah, and then the other question I had was about the limiting the size of the property, and I was trying to figure out, well, what causes a change? Let's say we say 10,000, but I heard, well, if there's too many of these that get built, but what's too many? Or conversely, if it was 12,000 and there's too few that get built, well, what's too few? Is there any quantitative number, or it's just your gut?
No, it's just finding that balance that the community is comfortable with and that the state doesn't react to and force us to change our code.
So how would a member of the public say, we've built too many of these? Would they come before a city council meeting and say, I want to talk about ADUs, and then they have to get it agendized, and then that's the opportunity?
Yeah, that would be one way, yeah.
Okay. What else did I hear?
And maybe while you're thinking, I thought of a couple of things that when we were looking at the 10,000-foot standard, most of the lots that are 10,000 or greater have 75 to 80-foot frontages or wider. We're not talking about the narrow lots in the old Los Altos or in the Paso Robles and Del Monte and those types of streets. Those lots aren't that big. They wouldn't meet that threshold. So, we're envisioning that these are going to be on wider lots where they can accommodate the parking and so forth.
Yeah, and another thing that I noted was if I built an ADU and I'm the homeowner and I'm living there, and 2 years go by and then I get transferred and I want to keep my house, does that mean I have to kick people out of the ADU because I'm no longer occupying that space? Or that
You have to, from the city attorney's perspective, it comes down to what are you calling your principal residence, and it's
so if I got
you have to live there half the year, I think. And
but if I get transferred for work and end up going to some other country, that sounds like I have to kick my renter out because I am moving.
yeah, that may be a problem.
And how would you know that I moved? It would be again complaint driven?
By complaint.
Yeah.
It'd be those wild parties in your backyard.
No one's going to complain if you move, right?
Yeah, exactly. But it's the wild parties that happen when I'm not there. And then there was a comment about flag lots, and I don't know if you want to respond to it now.
Yeah, the flag lots, we have two styles of these. The flag lots, sometimes they have combined driveways where 2 or 3 homes will have the same driveway. And in those cases, there's no parking allowed in those driveways. And from a civil perspective, it's a fire lane. They usually have easements that there's ingress and egress. So even putting trash cans out in the parking the driveway in a lot of these flag lots is probably against the civil restriction of it. And those are things that we can't enforce, but the residents that own those lots can. And the only places you can park in those driveways are on the non-restricted areas. Flag lots are 10,000 or more. Now they're 15,000 square feet, so they tend to be larger lots. And I wasn't seeing it as that big of an issue.
So it's 15,000 for both properties?
For the flag lot.
For the flag lot.
For the lot itself, and then they put another structure behind it. I mean, my understanding of a flag lot, right, is that there was one large piece of property, and then it got divided into 2.
Yeah, if it's in that configuration, the lot on the street has to be 10,000 square feet. The flag lot behind it has to be 15,000.
Okay.
And the driveway is not included in that area.
Gotcha.
So they tend to be very large sites.
Okay. So my comments are that it seems like the ADUs there's a lot of restrictions in building and the type of building. So I think that the purpose of this is really good. I'm not sure whether there should be public review or whether it should be just staff looking at it. I'm tossed and turned about that. I'd like to see a longer rental period because I think that the intent needs to be there, that we're trying to get people there that are there for many months. And I guess the other thing was about the size of the property. I'd rather see us go to 10,000 and see what happens because I don't think it applies to everybody. I don't think there's going to be a mad rush. I do have concerns about public parking because as a bike rider, it is crazy. A lot of places. There is a house that I used to live in that they have 4 cars all sitting out front, all in a very tight court, and it's insane. I mean, to see that many cars around, 5 or 6 cars for one household. So I don't know what the answer is for that.
This from a major bicyclist, you should point out.
Yeah, exactly. Those are my thoughts at the moment.
Okay, thank you, Mike.
I took a bunch of notes and I have a lot of thoughts. I'll try to synthesize them, but I am supportive of everything that we're trying to do to make to deal with this housing shortage that we are experiencing. I'd like Los Altos to be more inclusive, and I think this is a really easy way to increase our housing stock. So many times we talk about a handful of new apartments or condos on El Camino or in downtown or even Loyola Corners or any of our other commercial areas, and there's an uproar. And this is it has to go somewhere, and this is a really easy way to increase the shortage. And I actually think that having these smaller structures on a lot, if you have an extra 800 square feet, is better than having a monolithic building on a lot. And I would even say that, I would argue that to make it more accessible, I would remove all square foot limitations and make it available to every lot. But I know that's a pipe dream. But absolutely, it should be 10,000 square foot. And I want to disabuse the idea that a 10,000 square foot parcel is a small parcel. It's not. And if you have an extra 800 square feet, then this is, in my mind, an excellent use for it. Because, the best enforcement of bad behavior, in my mind, is that it's owner occupied. When you own your home, you are going to ensure that what is happening on your property conforms to your expectations. And if you don't, you should, and if this is a really great place to live, you should know who your neighbors are, and they should feel comfortable coming and talking to you and saying, this isn't conforming to, our expectations of a good neighbor. So, the fact that it's owner occupied, I think, is an excellent way of policing. David also mentioned that he's gotten almost no complaints in the entire time that we've had these. So that is an excellent track record of what we can expect with more of these. The fact that this is state mandated is a reflection of how little people are willing to make their cities more accessible to others. And the more difficult we make it, the more state mandates we're going to get, taking our ability to control our city out of our hands. So when I hear as a complaint, well, this is going to increase our population, I think, yeah, that is the point. We live in California, the most populate state in the United States. So we have 40 million people. We're not in Wyoming with 500,000. We all, whether we were I was born in Los Altos, or whether you came to Los Altos 10 years ago or 50 years ago, you were you created a population boom at the time that you came. So to suggest that that's it, no more people can come after us is unrealistic, and in my mind, it's an impossible dream. So I really appreciated the woman who came, who talked about having a shack in the back, because she put a human face on what this actually will look like. And in my mind, this keeps families together. As I read recently, I wish I had brought and shared the article, but it talked about how some and growing percentage of our households have two sets of adults, meaning not like my household where I have young children in it, but you have adult children or aging parents living together. And what this will do, it will actually keep families together. It will help residents who need a little extra income, have students or elderly or home helpers in their space. And it's going to help our city that's kind of losing its economic diversity. I can't tell you how many times I have kids in two different schools, and I can't tell you how many times on our listserv a request goes around from a teacher who says, does anyone have a room in their house that I can live in? I see it every couple weeks. So, those people will be contributors to our way of life, and I would hope that we can make more shacks in the back available to them. And, I think with an aging population, there's going to be more people that will need in-home help, or families who bring in a parent. I grew up in my household when my grandfather passed away. My grandmother moved in. And I can't tell you what a great, how good that is for families to be able to do that. So, if you can then even give those members independent space, I think it's a win-win for everyone. So I would completely reduce. I would make it available to every parcel. What we're doing as I run the numbers is we right now, if it's available to 15,000 and 13,000 square foot parcels, that represents 27% of our parcels. 10,000 represents 78%. So we're basically closing the gap between the have and the have-not, the have ADUs and the have-not ADUs, and we're actually making it more accessible to more people, and I'm supportive of that. I actually thought that increasing the fence height was an interesting idea, and if someone actually has something that's right up abutting them and they don't want to stare at that, if they think putting an extra foot or two would help. I don't know that it actually would, but I'm open to allowing two neighbors to agree to have their fence be taller. We can't legislate parking. We can't tell people you've got to use your garage. And I see it on my own street. There's a 3-car garage. Maybe if they have 1 car, that's like amazing. Most people just aren't doing it. I'm actually concerned that if we require people who take garages and convert a garage and make them then put another covered parking in addition to another uncovered parking, what it's going to encourage people to do is preserve the garage and go up, because then they'll only have to create 1 more space. And then what'll happen is after it's gone through, that garage gets shut, no car ever enters it, and it becomes, instead of an 800 square foot spot, it becomes a little double villa. So I'm not sure that's the best solution. I'm comfortable with reducing some of the parking requirements, though I know that would be really controversial. The issue with parking on streets, some streets have a bigger issue than like my street, and I hear it becomes 1 lane. So that is a real problem, but I would still say that since we can't legislate where you park or that you use your garage, I don't think it's unrealistic for people to comfortably go to their neighbor if their neighbor is parking every day in front of them and say, "Will you please not park in front of my house?" That's just like, I think.
Good manners?
Good manners, right. Yeah. I was in a situation where a sitter of ours would park across the street in front of our neighbor, and I didn't even know she was doing it, and the neighbor came over and said, "Hey, would you mind not doing that?" And we stopped. So, what is wrong with expecting that kind of behavior in our community? I would encourage it. I'm supportive of all the privacy requirements, no sills or openings facing adjacent parcels. And I would even say that I would eliminate the parking requirement if the accessory dwelling unit is located within 1 mile of a public transit spot. Right now it's written as half a mile, and I would say that if it's 1 mile, you could reduce parking. I'm sure that is also controversial, but if we want to encourage this, let's do it. That's what I got.
Okay. There's a lot that has already been said, so I won't repeat, but again, I think if an accessory structure currently is being used as a living unit, we should make it easier for property owner to make that official and have that count towards our housing needs. That's not going to change anything. It's just going to make us meet those guidelines better. I do think that taking out some of those regulations, I'm pretty sure they have to pay extra fees and go to the county for recording the deed restriction, all that. If we took some of those away, that this would help people, make those units more official, and so that they would count. So I'm supportive of that. I do wonder if a 10,000 square foot, where we used to have 15 or we have right now 15 for detached and 13 for attached, and maybe we should come up with some scenario where we bring those numbers down to, say, 12,000 for detached and 10,000 for attached, just because with all the distances that you have to maintain between accessory structures and the setbacks, it's just it may get a bit crowded on the 10,000 square foot lot to have another 800 square foot lot that is has decent space around it. But if it was attached, I assume it would be it would have to conform to all the setbacks of a principal residence, and so it really wouldn't change, the look of the. It's not a small lot, but the smaller lots. Whereas maybe at 12,000, we can afford to have them be detached, or maybe an option of having a smaller unit. Maximum for the smaller lots, and then go back to a higher number, maybe 500 and then 800 for the 10,000 and the 12,000. Maybe that's another way to look at it. And then maybe revisit that later on in some years. I do want to point out that we're not going to have bigger houses. We're not going to have any denser, properties are not going to have more building on them as a result of this change. So it's really, we're still all having to comply with the site coverage and FAR. So I'm not worried about density and want to point that out. I am not so sure about skipping the design review process because in my own backyard, right behind my house, someone built something and I was notified, and I didn't like that they were facing, that their living space and their little patio was facing my yard. So I made a point, when I got the notice, I made a point of writing a letter asking that they have their living area facing their own property, not mine. And I think that if we skip that design review process or some sort of notification, that neighbors will not have that chance to voice their opinion. So I'm leaning towards wanting that design review process kept in. And then I do agree. I think 1 mile is walkable. So I think, half a mile, 1 mile, it can go up to 1 mile, like Ronit suggested. And then one last thing, I do not like the no daylight plane, no restrictions on the garage, second story on the garage. I think that's going to really not protect neighbors properly. Maybe, as David mentioned, we have that 18-foot height limit. We have some sort of daylight plane on those garage, second stories over garage, but to just kind of give blank, permit for that seems not fair to some neighbors. And then I also agree that the whole owner occupancy, it makes a lot of sense, but I do want to know what would we do if someone moves away. And so wouldn't the person who is renting the house and is, can afford a nice big house like that, wouldn't that person qualify as, as good as an owner to be watching what's going on the property? So I have a problem with that owner occupancy, and that's all.
Okay. Would you like to go?
Sure. So I am supportive of this as drafted. I think that I think people are going to be, the homes are typically their largest single investment, and they're going to be protective of maintaining the value in their primary residence. And so, forcing people to maximize their homes and create space that they don't really need versus allowing them to provide an ancillary unit that someone else can use seems to make a lot of sense to me. And so I'm supportive of the 10,000 square foot limit. I think that, or reducing the minimum to 10,000 square feet. I do, but the point that someone from the public brought up that 30 days may not be sufficient, I also think makes a lot of sense. And someone said we're trying to encourage, if we're doing it for the purposes that we're talking about, I don't see any reason why that shouldn't be 6 months. I mean, that's, teachers are typically, here for even, longer than that in just the school year. So that seems to be something I would be strongly in favor of, to reduce that element of churn and people just using it for kind of short-term rental, however that may be defined. So I think those were the two. Agree very much with what Ronit said earlier, and I don't want to repeat a lot of that. So,
Thank you.
So I agree in principle that this is a good thing. I should start by saying that. I do appreciate that we are potentially adding a load to the infrastructure of our town. I think that was a very good point. I do believe that the infrastructure of the town is being massively affected by Mountain View's development. I think that if we expect a cascade of ADUs, we are going to be sadly disappointed. And I have great fears that we will lower to 10,000, we will reduce all these requirements, and we'll get one. And the state will look at the housing element and go, hey, what's going on here? Because, we're talking about an 800 square foot unit potentially at $300 a square foot. We're talking about a $250,000 investment. And there are not many people who are willing to do that nilly-willy on a lot that is already developed. So let's take a look at the big picture here. I support the 10,000 minimum. I don't think it should be higher, because I think if we're in for a penny, we should be in for a pound. But I want to point out that a 10,000 square foot lot has a maximum development, I believe, of 4,000 square feet in Flair, 3,500. David?
35%.
10,000 square foot lot, maximum floor area ratio?
35%.
So 3,500 square feet. So that means that the most development, including this ADU, is 3,500 square feet. That means 2/3 of the lot is empty. We're not talking about huge impact here. Now, I appreciate, therefore, that the infrastructure strains, I think, are not going to come from us. I think they're external. It's a very good point, but we're paying the price for Mountain View's incredible development, and we're in a joint school district. I'd like to say that in public. Neighborhood impact, I think that is important that neighbors have the opportunity to say something. But I believe I heard David say that we're approaching this as a ministerial review because the state is strongly encouraging, if not mandating, ministerial review? Mandated. So design review, out the window. However, we do have the 18-foot limit, and if we don't allow windows on two sides, I think that will adequately discourage what I can envision as the worst-case scenario, which is a 2-story cube. You literally take the peaked roof off your garage and plop a cube on top to maximize the space. I could see someone doing that. That's probably the least compatible style for anything that would go on in the town. And I should point out that some years ago, someone was trying to do an accessory dwelling unit and match the style of their house. And the neighbors were very upset, and they protested. And it required a variance to do that, and so the variance was denied. And so that applicant put a second-story cube there that was completely legal. And the neighbors had to live with it. So it was be careful what you wish for. With that said, I believe that keeping it simple is the way to encourage people to do this, if that's what we want to do. And I strongly believe that we should add these units for all the reasons that everybody else had said, which no one mentioned the other one, which is boomerang kids. It would be very nice if they were not in the house, if they were nearby, but not in the house. And I'd like to therefore say that keeping it simple means a 10,000 square foot lot with an 800 square foot one size unit, one size fits all. I think owner occupancy is important. I don't see a good solution to if someone is transferred to Hong Kong for 3 years or 5 years, what they do. I don't see a good answer to that, and I'm sorry, there's no magic pill here. I do think that life being what it is, it will be self-enforcing. Even if there's a deed restriction, it may affect the value of the property at sale. But if someone is transferred to Hong Kong, they will rent out their main part of the residence. The town will not know unless someone is abusing the neighbor's adjacent property values or their rights, having wild parties, in which case the city will know and things will happen. There is enforceability. I'd like to point out that covered parking is not necessarily a garage. It's a carport. And so if you convert a garage to a living unit and then put up a carport and have the adjacent space on the driveway, you're in business, and it's not an expensive fix. But I have to say, I've always taken pride in Los Altos in that 70% of our town is 10,000 or larger, that people do actually park in their garages. Maybe not in every neighborhood, but I think that I lord it over my friends who live in Palo Alto a lot because their lots are smaller, their houses are smaller, and there's just too much stuff in this world, and we're all guilty of it to a certain extent. So the thing about parking in front of your neighbors, this is something that I run into in the construction zones where people feel like they have the right to the city's right-of-way in front of their house, when in fact anybody can park there. The courtesy is not blocking someone's mailbox, and the second courtesy is not doing it all the time. So if we have a modicum of courtesy, which I hope we have in town and have in the past, I don't see that as a long-term problem, which is why I believe we should require the one space and no more for the ADU and not worry about extensive parking requirements. Let me see what else I have here. Ministerial we got. I really appreciate Mike's pointing out, and Alex also, about preventing churn. If we are looking to provide housing for people who would like to stay in town and can't, then making the minimum rental period larger than a month makes a lot of sense. What that should be, I don't know. And how enforceable it is, I don't know. Again, it's a matter of complaint, and I don't want to put a burden on staff for a code enforcement officer to go out all the time. Having said that, we're not going to see an avalanche of these things. It's just a very expensive, very long process, even in the ministerial review. This is a big deal. And I know because I've thought about it many times. I have a large enough lot to do it, and each time I, who do this for a living, didn't do it. It's too much. That's my comments.
I'm concerned about transforming our very low-density town. Even though we do have comparatively large lots, that's one of the things people love about us. We're here because it's the one place in this valley that's on the valley floor where you can feel kind of sort of like you're not just, elbow to knee with your neighbor. And I don't really care what Mountain View does, except for where they adversely impact us, which they seem to be doing more and more on both schools and traffic. Try going down San Antonio in the morning, either direction. I don't care what Palo Alto has done. I care about what's right for Los Altos. I'm also very sensitive to those who want a discrete interior unit for their own purposes, whether it's Boomerang Kids, thank God mine's in Austin, Texas, or whether it's an elderly family person or whatever. I'm really sensitive to people having the right to do within the envelope of all the normal setbacks that we've set for a residential unit to kind of do whatever they want with that space. And to that extent, I would favor putting these, allowing these units up to 10 in the 10,000 square foot lots, but I would really seriously consider whether those should be limited to 500 square feet as a practical matter. I'd also support moving the exterior only down to 13,000, but I don't think we should have exterior separate units on 10,000 or 11,000 or even maybe 12,000 square foot lots. I just don't think it's a really practical thing, and the people who are in the majority of the town who live in 10,000 square foot lots want to be able to go in their backyard and have as much expansiveness and feel that expansiveness and not feel like they've got accessory units right over the fence line, 2.5, 5 feet away, that somebody's living in. It changes the tenor of the town. I think it's a bad idea. I'm really concerned about the garage conversion and the restrictions that the state has put on in terms of that overhang. I think that's kind of crazy. So I'd like us to find a way to not have that if we possibly can. I would not favor further reducing the parking. I think a half-mile to transit is sufficient. I agree with several of the other commissioners that requiring the one space is sufficient. I would oppose, no one's mentioned this, but I would oppose the incentives that apparently came up at the design review about the idea of maybe adding the 200 square feet if you have to have the covered parking or the other parking. I don't want to do that. I want a nice, this is a munged up mess as it is. We don't want to make it any more complicated than we have to. I would like to see us retain some sort of review anytime there is either a new building or a conversion of an exterior detached structure. Because I think those are the ones that have the most impact on your neighbor's quality of life. If they're building a unit, if someone's building something and it's within their normal building envelope, within our normal setbacks, I think we can do ministerial. But anything outside that bound, I think we should have a chance to review and a chance for the neighbors to comment. I would like Commissioner Matteague and Sanek and Phoebe and a couple others may have mentioned, I would like to see us go with a maximum length of minimum rental, if I can say that right. Did I do that right? Maximum length of minimum rental, there we go, in accordance with whatever we can get away with, whatever the city attorney says, for all the reasons that have already been mentioned. And although I think it's hard to enforce owner occupancy, I think we should keep the deed restriction. I think it helps at least provide the notion that the owner has some control and responsibility for making sure whatever else is going on in the rest of this unit, and then deal with on a case-by-case basis if there's problems.
Okay, very good.
I had a question for staff that if you'll allow. Well, maybe it's not for staff. What would be the advantage? I know what the advantage for the town would be to have currently illegally converted illegal units converted to legal. I know what's the advantage for us. What would be the advantage for an owner? Because I heard David or John say that we'd have to send a code enforcement officer to make sure that what was done was legal and it meets current building code. I understand the concept, but I don't see any impetus for someone to do it.
I'll give you an example.
Go.
If you have someone in your living unit that doesn't have a full kitchen, and so they're still coming into the main house to cook, as my son did at his father's house, they may well be incented to have a complete kitchen so that it's truly a separate.
Okay, thank you.
I don't know if it's $250,000. Well, no, it's not from scratch. It's just it's just a kitchen.
It's a crazy amount of money.
Just an example.
That was my question.
Yeah. Okay.
Sorry.
That wasn't for staff, though. That was for.
I realize
did
it
you
wasn't
have an
staff.
example, or no? Okay.
No, I don't have a response.
Okay, so let me just. I won't belabor anything that's already been talked about, but I like the idea of promoting, again, whether it's practical or residents choose to avail themselves of the opportunity, an amnesty program for previously not secondary living units, but accessory structures. And, it seems to me that's low-hanging fruit to get that. Again, whether it's attractive to the homeowner or not, that's, we can't do anything about that. But I do like promoting that. I did think that it might be reasonable to consider splitting, and I can go either way. I hear some people are fine with 10,000, but I did actually agree with Bahi that the lot size at 10,000 feet for an integrated unit versus maybe 12,000 at a detached that could make sense to start. I can agree with a longer period of rental. I don't think it needs to be 6 months, though. I'd really be between 60 and 90 days. I mean, you could get students coming in doing, again, I'm not meaning students with parties, but like graduate students or someone who wants to come in and rent because they're on some sort of post-grad work or something like that. And so I think 60 or 90 days allows for that kind of thing, but really kind of rules out the Airbnb. So for all, I won't belabor the deed thing. I do think it's sort of problematic. I don't see a way around it. I do think notification is good for exterior ADUs. Yeah, detached. Sorry, the terminology. Detached ADUs. I'm okay with the parking as proposed at the half mile and all that. I mean, I think in this town, a lot of us, as it was mentioned in this, some people landscape, you can't park in front of their, we all really forget that that's city property, and really anybody can park in front of anyone's house if that land is really accessible. We're probably, my husband's a stickler. We actually, in a 2-car garage, have 2 cars, a motorcycle, and 5 bicycles, not to mention a lot of other junk. So if anyone needs lessons, I'll hire out my husband. But, so anyway, I agree with the parking as proposed in this. I think ministerial review is probably okay in most cases, but I think maybe when for new construction, there may be examples where you want to bring that forward, but if you're converting existing structures, then maybe it's not. I'm kind of open on that. There was, just to be nitty-gritty, there was a typo in the first line of the proposed draft amendment, and an attached or detached residential dwelling unit which provides, it doesn't prove. But anyway, that's the only one I got. So that's my impression. So I'm not sure we need some more discussion, or if someone is willing to make a motion. We've kind of had a range here.
Well, I'd like to point out, Madam Chair, that usually you should be keeping like a straw poll of who says what on all these good things, which I know you've done.
No, I was using it to take notes for what I was going to say. No, we do have a range. I mean, I don't.
Well, but I have a question for John and David. I mean, do you have?
Yeah.
I feel like we brought up some things that the current ordinance isn't addressing, or needs to be looked at, like the rental contracts, et cetera. So, do you want us to make a motion now, or do you want to research and then come back and then have us?
I think, and jump in, John, if I'm leading us too far away. But I think, like the rental issue, we need to consult with the city attorney. If we had some general guidance from the commission, I'm certainly comfortable with a motion that we can kind of, if we can frame it and we'll work it out, the legal issues with the city attorney before we bring it to the council in terms of what a maximum minimum rental period would be.
I like that.
If I've got that right.
Can I, to
Right,
your point, it sounds like your recommendation that a 10,000 square foot be allowed to have a attached unit within it would be acceptable to everyone. So my question is, what would you not have that same opinion for a 9,000 square foot for attached? I mean, essentially, if you're saying you're okay with someone doing whatever they want in their own envelope that exists currently, add another door and maybe put a little kitchenette, what's the difference between 10,000, 9,000, 8,000?
Well, that's a good point. I was just focusing on how it was framed in the ordinance. But you're right. Your proposition was everything.
Well, wait a minute, but the junior ADU does that.
Well, but
If
we
you-
didn't.
We don't have that.
We don't have that.
Ordinance in front of us.
That is another avenue we could consider, is we could come back with that ordinance, or come back with both of these if you thought they were related. I just thought that the junior wasn't getting us much more than the regular was.
Right.
Except I was thinking the regular ordinance was a higher quality.
Well, and you pointed out that in our town, if what we're trying to do in the goal is get people who live long-term in a smaller unit on properties that already exist than in a unit that's built in someone's house where you can't cook in the kitchen except in a microwave. I think even students won't do that at a certain point. Noisy college-type students. If you want someone who really is going to live there like a grown-up, you have to allow them to cook.
Yeah.
So that's why I think David made a very smart approach when he said that doesn't work in our community. But that doesn't address the question of, do we have enough? I mean, I can craft a motion and see if we can do it, because I'll tell you what I think I heard, and then people can offer friendly amendments if I've blown it in any way. But I move that we recommend to City Council approval of the changes to accessory dwelling unit regulations per attachment C for a 10,000 square foot lot as a minimum lot size with an 800 maximum unit attached or detached, that the staff explore with the city attorney the maximum, minimum rental period with the goal of having it to encourage, at such a length to encourage long-term rental, that one car parking space is fine, that owner occupancy is fine, and that neighbors be notified if there's going to be a detached ADU, whether it's conversion of an existing detached accessory structure or construction of a new detached accessory structure, on the understanding that the state will not allow design review, that it is ministerial review, but neighbors will be notified so that they will have an opportunity to share their opinions with staff?
Well, I would say if we're going to go through the notification process, we should use the Design Review Commission.
Okay, but it sounds like we can't
It's
do
all
that.
set up. I mean, we can. We're doing that now.
We can.
We're technically not allowed to do design review on accessory dwellings now.
Okay.
We finesse it through the Design Review Commission, and we're very careful not to do design review and just apply
I was
our
going to say,
ordinance.
so we have a design review commission that doesn't do design review.
Well, we
On
framed
accessory
the
structures.
On
second
accessory
living
structures.
units.
You're to be
Okay.
commended for that.
Yes.
And
Okay, so in
So-
that case,
we have that process, and I
Okay.
think rather than
So in that case, my motion says, let's continue the existing process of that kind of,
for detached.
for detached accessory, whether it's conversion of an existing detached accessory unit to a dwelling unit, or whether it's construction of a new detached accessory dwelling
And
unit.
would you also include?
Wait, I need
additions?
I need a second, and then we'll look for.
I just need a clarification.
Yes, sir.
It's 800 or
Maximum.
50, up to 50% of the.
No, 800 is an absolute limit that is being proposed.
No, but it's also if you have 1,200.
Oh, yes.
Oh,
Right.
that's already.
Well,
If- huh?
it's what we've drafted is an 800 square foot limit, and also no larger than
10 feet.
half of the living
Right.
space.
I was just making sure that's
Yes,
included
I
as well.
accept that.
That's-
That's in my
Right.
motion.
What I heard was you're making a motion per the ordinance we've drafted.
Yes.
With
The minimum maximum rental.
minimum maximum rental,
Correct.
and using the Design Review Commission for the detached conversion or
Yes.
detached new
Yes.
accessory structure.
That's what my motion is.
So I'll second that.
Now, do
Okay,
I get
so
any
now
friendly
discussion
amendment?
I'd like
or-
to offer a friendly amendment.
You need to turn your mic on.
Button doesn't work. That the detached units be available only at lots of 12,000 square feet and above.
I don't accept that motion. I'm doing 10,000 deliberately.
I have a couple friendly amendments to suggest. One is that we change the provision that says that the parking requirement, you don't need it if it's a half mile from public transportation, change it to 1 mile.
I don't agree with that because I walk a lot. It's a half a mile from my house to town. I never see anybody walking but me. And I think it's, given the state of the public transportation in our area, I think it's specious unless you're actually in a city that provides adequate public, like San Francisco. We just don't have it. So I don't accept that amendment.
What about, I thought you were going to make it so, which is that if it's an attached ADU, that we don't have a limit on the size of the structure or the lot.
I'd support that.
Yeah.
Wait, could you
So you could do
rephrase
so-
that?
So
1,200
what I'm
on
saying
that.
is, if it's an existing structure and they just put in the ADU inside that structure,
Right.
that there shouldn't be any restriction as to the size of the lot.
So that would be a change to the proposed ordinance, because we don't have anything like that at all in this proposal.
I don't know.
Yeah, I mean,
So
that would,
if it was a 9,000 square foot parcel, you could have a attached unit within it.
Well, attached, I need to understand, are you saying
Integrated.
attached by addition or carved out of the interior?
Carved out of the interior.
Okay, because carved out of the interior, I think, falls under the state description of junior ADUs, and then there's a whole other raft of goodies that go with that.
No, I didn't think so. I thought if you carved it out of the
How's it different?
of
We
the structure,
could.
that it you had, and you put a kitchen in, so that and an outside entryway, that you could.
Yes, but
Then
then
it's
you
not a
you
junior
don't
unit.
have to provide parking for that, which would have to be,
right, we could do this.
I'm not saying we can't, I'm saying it's not in there. And yes,
Yeah.
I would accept that. I think a junior ADU, the only reason I didn't.
It's not called a junior ADU
He's
because
saying
it has
full
a kitchen.
He's saying full
kitchen.
kitchen.
He's saying a full regular ADU at any lot size.
That's included in the
Within
current
the
structure that's
enclosure of
already
the
there.
house.
Is it
Under the
limited to
same setbacks
800
on-
square feet, or does it not matter?
Yeah, it is.
Okay.
It would be limited.
So like that.
You know what, I don't think that serves the community.
I don't think anyone's going to do it.
I think you're right, though.
On a 3,000 square foot limit and give up 800
Square feet.
for-
Yeah.
I'm going to have my, grandparent, or my parents come and stay with me in my house, and I want to build part of it out so that they can stay in it.
But you're building in the house.
Correct.
Not building out of the house.
That's what I'm saying.
You're converting within.
He's saying that any house or any lot less than 10,000, less than the average size, which is 22% of our houses, is prohibited from having an integrated
Or having two
ADU,
kitchens. It's
or having
prohibited from
two.
having two kitchens in the unit.
Is it-
That's basically what we're saying, is our code
Right.
does not allow two kitchens in anybody's house, period. What you're saying is perhaps we should allow two kitchens in anybody's house, as long as it's inside the existing walls.
Exactly.
Well, David, that's not exactly what
You're
David
looking-
said,
you're
because there's the
looking at me.
butler's pantry.
Are you-
There's the
I'm
butler's
looking at you
pantry.
like,
Are you asking for our reaction to that?
Yeah.
Let's
Because
start there.
okay.
Yeah.
That's what I'm looking
Yes,
at.
please.
Because this has nothing to do, in my mind, with this ordinance. This is a total different planning change.
I wasn't willing to go down to that level, although I agree that would facilitate it to the most we could with that integral type. Some of the concerns that came up for me are the same concerns that we have with any of these, and that's parking and intensity of land use and all of that. And so my thought was that we have a great deal of non-conforming parcels that are very small, and it just is going to exacerbate the parking and density impacts in neighborhoods where there's not a lot of on-street parking because the lots are so narrow and all of this. So for me, when we start getting less than 10,000-foot lots, we're talking about narrow lots in different neighborhoods. And it just brought up a whole host of other issues that, maybe if I were to think about some objective standards that we might apply, but then the state law would trump us from doing that.
I don't
we
accept
could do it.
that amendment.
That's fine.
Okay. So we're back
Right,
to...
So
Back to
Back to the
proposed
amendment that has
amendment.
been seconded. We've had some discussion. Can I call a vote on the motion on the table? Okay. So all those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed?
Nay.
Okay, so we have 6 in favor, 1 opposed. And so staff, you have clear enough.
Do you want to state why you're saying nay? Because it's also good for the city council to know
That's true.
what.
Sure.
Yeah.
I think that having, what do we call them, detached accessory units on 10,000 square foot lots is not a good idea.
Because
Because they can be inside of setbacks where I think it interferes with the neighborhood, the neighbors.
Well, we're allowing accessory structures.
We've already, so we've,
So the
yeah.
concern
For the
is
record.
allowing a detached accessory dwelling unit on a 10,000 square foot lot. There's not enough land.
There's not enough that's within the otherwise non-habitable setback. You're now putting habitation in the setback that you normally can't have habitation in.
You can, you just can't have a full kitchen.
I mean, you've always had habitation.
We've always had
But
habitation.
now you have people living there 24/7
That's right.
potentially.
That's right. Habitation for me is being able to sleep there overnight. 24
Well,
Yeah, but they do that now. I tell you, they do that, yeah.
Well,
Anyway, we've
that's a different
voted,
problem.
so yeah, for.
And that's a different
yes,
problem.
Yeah, yeah.
And
So
maybe
we've got
that's
it
some
on the
other way.
record, so
Okay.
I think we're done with this agenda item. So we're going to take I believe we probably need a 5-minute break. Will that serve everybody well?
Yes.
All
We'll come
right.
back at 9:30.
So be back at 9:31.
What else do we have today?
We just have the BPAC
Conversation.
discussion, yeah.
Good going, Chair.
Nice job.
It's not over yet, don't say anything.
Go ahead.
Thank you.
Okay. So, well, they only have one, so you can have the principal house and the accessory dwelling, and under state law, that's considered as one single-family residence.
Oh, okay.
So,
My number was 280. You said 200.
right.
I was looking at $350 a foot.
Okay. All right. Well, that's really helpful. Thank you.
Okay, can we reconvene? Okay, we're going to reconvene. We're going to move on to item number 4. And that is the discussion of commission jurisdiction over transportation.
Thank you very much, Chair Meadows, members of the Planning and Transportation Commission. John Biggs with the Community Development Department. The council has appointed a subcommittee of 2 council members, Councilmember Bruins and Councilmember Lee Ng, to take a look at transportation as it relates to the Planning and Transportation Commission's role. We agendized this item to allow you an opportunity to discuss this and provide some information to staff on this review of the transportation aspect of your assignment, and then staff will take your advice, along with the advice of the Bicycle and Pedestrian Advisory Committee, meet with the 2 council members that form the subcommittee and develop changes to the rules and regulations or policies for the Planning and Transportation Commission to, I think, transfer transportation duties from you to the BPAC committee. So with that, I'll open it up to the commission to begin your discussions.
Okay, any questions for staff before we open up to public comment, because we do have.
I do.
So my question is, I was on Planning Commission before it was Planning and Transportation Commission, and that current city council moved it into Planning Commission because at that time the concept was that if you were looking at long-term planning for the city, that transportation was integral to the planning process. I want to know the discussion, how this changed.
I could tell you.
I don't have that background on why that's
go for it,
about
Mike.
so.
Well, I was at the council meeting where it was talked about, and 2 of the council members wanted to form a subcommittee. It was in my report, actually, because I was there.
Early coming up.
To form a subcommittee, which included 1 member of our commission, 1 member of BPAC, 1 member of the staff liaisons, and the 2 liaisons with the city council to all get together to figure out what the right answers were. And the city council voted that they would rather have the 2 city council members that are liaison with staff to talk about what the right answers are, and then propose back to city council.
Why?
Right.
You have to ask city council.
Oh, so we don't know.
Oh, the original proposal, the letter from the 2 city council members who proposed this, was really more, let's look at what those responsibilities are and figure out where's the best place for them to be. That was what was in the letter. But the discussion at council suddenly kind of transformed through the discussion to be, well, it probably should be at BPAC, so let's figure out what they should do. But it was not the original concept.
Okay.
Okay, so
I have a question, because one of my concerns is that, as Phoebe just mentioned, the Planning Commission was at the size of 5 people on the commission, and when they joined the 2 commissions together, they increased it from 5 to 7. Am I right?
No, planning was always 7.
Was it? Yeah. Okay, never mind. Okay.
any.
We do have members of the public. That
Yeah,
was-
I know. Any other questions for staff before we open it up for public comment?
No, I'll just might add one more thing since I was there. There was always also the comment, which Commissioner McTeague concurred with, that somehow the PTC hadn't been doing its job with respect to transportation.
I didn't concur with them.
And I'm not sure what it is that the commission is really supposed to do. So I'm not sure what it is we're supposedly haven't been doing. But that was the sense of the council, was somehow we'd been abrogating our responsibilities.
Yeah, and my comment was that we actually have been saying we want to do more traffic things, and it hasn't happened. So which one of the council members thought that I was saying that we weren't doing our jobs?
Well, let's reserve that for discussion, and let's open up public comment. I have one card from West Brinsfield. If you'd care to speak, if anyone else is going to speak, please fill out a green card.
Hi, just an aside, although the card asked for it, public members are not under any obligation to give their name or address. So although Ms. Ambiel was happy to provide her last name, she did not have to do so, nor even her first name. My name is Wes Brinsfield. I am a member of the Los Altos Bicycle Pedestrian Advisory Commission. I am not speaking on behalf of the commission, but I am speaking as a member of the commission right now. This, and I think your questions and partial discussion addresses this somewhat. I believe that we're putting the cart before the horse, so I'm kind of surprised at the way that this developed, that the commissions were not first asked, as it was originally planned, about what the what it should look like and who should have what responsibility and those type of things. Instead, it was a leap immediately to coming to the BPAC and adding the T to the end of the BPAC. I'm not averse to that, nor am I advocating it. I'm just saying that I'm surprised that that decision was made on the dais without a discussion amongst our two commissions about how it actually should look. And since David didn't start the 3 minutes, I'll assume that I've taken 1.5 of that.
Okay.
And I would welcome a discussion between our two commissions, and we have had those discussions. Former chairs have had those discussions. Liaisons have had those discussions. I believe one of the impetuses for taking a look at this is from public comment that has been on places such as Nextdoor, in which people have been complaining mightily about traffic and transportation and the belief that it's not being looked at holistically. Whether that's where council may have the opinion that PTC hasn't been doing its job, I don't know. But certainly there has been a public outcry about traffic. And when you ask the police, what are the 3 top things that they deal with? They say traffic, traffic, traffic. When we get addressed by members of the public, the main things we hear are traffic, traffic, traffic. And I assume that you may hear similar things. So again, it's a very important topic, whether it belongs with BPAC and adding a T at the end, or stays with PTC, or is a completely new commission, I would have hoped would have been something discussed before it immediately made the jump that it did. Be that as it may, it's here now, and we need to, I guess, address that. By the way, just for the record, we are the Bicycle Pedestrian Advisory Commission. We used to be a committee in a traffic commission, and we are no longer that committee. We were formed as BPAC because there are some mandates made that you have to have a BPAC in order to apply for grants. And so that was one of the reasons that there was a separation between BPAC as a committee and BPAC as a commission. So thank you.
All right. Thank you. Thank you, Wes. All right. Jim Wing, and then Nadim Malouf will be final. Thank you.
I'm Jim Wing, and I've been appearing before the various commissions we've had for the past 20 years. And one of the things, since I walk every day, I understand bicycles, pedestrians, and traffic. And believe me, in the last few years, I have spent a lot of time sitting on curbs, counting traffic. And one thing you learn is the nature of traffic. And believe me, it has changed since you took over on transportation. Because our prime concern right in the city right now is the cut-through commuter traffic. And these people only know one thing, is I'm going to go on local streets if I don't have to stop. They could care less about speed humps, anything. And the reason they're cutting through our local streets is they're having to stop on 280, 85, San Antonio, and Foothill. And really, in reality, there's really not much a commission or hardly anybody can do anything about that. Now, when I look at the discrete traffic problems we have in the city, which a commission can address, they all address what is called complete streets. Complete streets are pedestrians, they're bicycles, and they are traffic. And really, you change one, and you kind of change all 3. So therefore, having discussions in one body does help. Now, for we residents, it's one-stop shopping. And now, I've appeared before you quite a few times since you took on transportation, and my batting average is 0. And not to your fault, is because changing traffic is very difficult, because you heard all the laws about the housing in here. The traffic laws go much more. There's basically the codes are running 10,000 pages, and they cover everything from the size of the screw to everything. And it's very difficult to ever change. Any resident or commission member could ever make any strong recommendations. You can listen, and the state law says only a traffic engineer can do traffic design. So you can't really do any design. You can listen, and then you have to pass on to there. Now, what has helped BPAC is the fact that the staff engineer is the traffic engineer. Now, I'll give you an example. BPAC for many years, I'll go maybe a little bit late, BPAC for many years has, we want the bicycle loops to work. Okay, so through an intense struggle of trying to get council to fund it, finally there was a window to fund it. Now the secret of the bicycle loops that helped everybody was that all the traffic signal light controllers had to be changed from dumb controllers built in 1970 to smart controllers. Now, what happened in that process was that, number one, all the traffic controllers were changed to smart controllers. What was slipped in was synchronization with Foothill on the key sites.
Can you wrap it up? One last sentence.
And then, but the end result was BPAC reduced the traffic or increased the capacity of Foothill. It has cut the traffic jams down. It has cut the traffic jams on San Antonio.
Thank you, Mr. Wing. Appreciate it.
It's been a very significant change.
Now we're moving on to, thank you, to Mr. Malouf. And I'm pronouncing, if I'm mutilating the name, please feel free to correct me.
Thank
I am?
You are. Thank
Okay.
you. I am Nadim Malouf. I am also a commissioner on the BPAC, but I speak here tonight, much like my colleagues, as a resident of Los Altos. I did participate in the City Council meeting last week that did address this issue. Of course, the motion that directed the exploration of moving the traffic jurisdiction to a different commission. That came at the heel of a very heated conversation about raising the traffic, the speed limit on Cuesta.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that was perhaps a very, it demonstrates how emotional the topic of traffic is in the city at this point in time. My comment is limited to just perhaps one request for tonight's conversation. I would love, as a resident, to hear from you collectively and individually what your perception of the traffic responsibility is as it is today, not in the future, but as a PTC where you've had the jurisdiction of traffic for the last past. How do you perceive that responsibility and how did you address it? Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. So with that, we're going to close public comment and resume our discussion.
So I'd like to ask staff a question, because I think this gets to the basic issue, and that is when things get put on the agenda, we don't say this is what we want on the agenda unless we say it at the end of the meeting. But you guys are putting things on our agenda all the time that we need to cover. And so I know that we've collectively talked about we've got transportation responsibilities. We'd like to see more of that, and it hasn't happened. So I'm kind of, I don't know why. And that's, and I know, John, you have one department, and Cedric is working under a different department, so it gets hard to have Cedric show up or wherever.
And Cedric isn't at the city anymore.
I know that, but I'm using Cedric as the example of what's happened in the past. So I wanted to hear from you guys, what's working, what doesn't work, and
Well, as far as I knew, things were working when the city's transportation engineers had something that needed to come for review. They brought that item for you to review and develop a recommendation on to the city council, much like the speed and the changes in speeds to allow radars. They came to you, they made a presentation along with an officer from the police department, you developed a recommendation that then went on to the city council. So it's like we do at the planning staff level. When there's a project that comes forward, we prepare the project and get it agendized for you to discuss and consider. So it's just one of those things that the transportation engineers, along with their public works director, is working on, and when the appropriate transportation or circulation item needs your input and review, they would schedule that for your discussion and recommendation. So.
I mean, when you ask what we think our responsibilities are, I mean, I think that we have had many instances where residents have come and said our area is being impacted, and we put it on the agenda. And one of the things I thought we did recently, or Cedric would bring forward something, and I think we have approved almost every recommendation that has been suggested by the engineers and the police department as helping them enforce. The irony is that...
Well, we didn't approve. We recommended approval.
We recommended
to the city
approval.
council.
The irony is in the years that I've been on here, the police have asked us for one thing, and that was to be able to, the ability to enforce on streets that right now the state tells us our speed limits are too low. And we were unanimous in our recommendation to
And so
approve
was
it,
BPAC.
but it's not popular because anecdotally people think if you increase the speed limit, despite the fact that the data says it's not true, that if you increase the speed limits, people will drive faster. So if you don't like the recommendation given, you can maybe ask somebody else to give a recommendation, but I don't know that you'll get a different recommendation.
I would like to point out that BPAC is not televised, whereas the Planning Commission is. And that might be a reason to keep traffic in this commission, because you get a wider dispersal of information to the public.
You know, I was also on it before, and one of the things, you know, I'm not opposed to the idea of it going back to them. I think if you think, though, that we're going to, I'm like trying to speak really loud now for you. If you think that, you know, the reality of having more traffic is a result of a failure of a commission, that's the wrong way to look at it. We have more traffic because of a whole host of reasons, and it's not any one commission not doing, I think, their job. But if you think that, you know, we'll have less traffic if some other group handles it, I'm totally open to that too.
Well,
but when we had it separate, one of the things that came up, so BPAC would review traffic, and let's say we had a project, and we would then revisit the traffic implications involved because we're looking at a project holistically. And there would be frustration because we'd get like a memo summarizing the meeting from BPAC that wouldn't tell us what the substance of the conversation was. So we would just have it all over again. And at the time, we didn't always have a representative who would then describe the conversation. So it was frustrating for the applicant because they were doing the same thing twice. And it was frustrating for BPAC because they didn't feel like they were being heard, or their conversation decision-making was, you know, given the proper... you know, that they had the authority on an issue. So it was muddled, and then it came to us. And so, you know, going back there, I think you're still going to have a little bit of that problem. But, I mean, I'm open.
But before, BPAC was a committee that would would report to the Traffic Commission to say these are the things that needed to happen, and then that would have to go to the Planning Commission.
And there was a timing where we would be reviewing a project and we hadn't gotten all the reports.
Right. I think what's been really great is that BPAC sees projects and gives their input so that when they come before us, they've already reviewed it, and especially about bikes and lockers and things like that. That's what my underlying question was, what's wrong? I mean, there's something that two council members feel is not being addressed, and I, you know, would ask that question of the liaisons, when you guys meet, what's wrong? Because I don't think people know what's wrong. They just aren't happy with things, and I would rather have that conversation of what are we trying to fix? Because I think, as mentioned, we've looked at things. The First Street Foothill project, when they wanted to redo the signals, and we talked about it. We said we knew the backup things. We brought up before issues, because I think we're all around town, and so it doesn't matter if it's in one commission or another. I'm personally whatever, but I think that what's the underlying problem isn't being addressed. Somebody just said, let's just put it all together again, without having a lot of input from the people that have to deal with it.
I think Wes had a good point, which is, what are we trying to do? I mean, if we know what the goal is from City Council, then it will be easier to evaluate whether we're meeting the goal. I mean, I think that a lot of the things that improved with traffic were the response by the city traffic engineer to a problem and working on it. I don't believe that it was our input per se, but I do believe that the traffic aspect of the larger scale projects that we're seeing in our commercial districts has, as you were saying, a holistic approach that I think benefits. But I'm not volunteering for more work. If they want to take it away,
Right.
it's fine.
Right.
But I am concerned that it's not in the public eye.
Well, if I can just reference the city manager's memo to you all, he was asking for your input so that you could help the council liaisons determine what is the most appropriate means to ensure that all transportation matters are being adequately reviewed. So it sounds, reading between the lines there's some concern that transportation issues are not being adequately reviewed. So what would be your recommendations in making sure that they do get adequately reviewed?
Is that what you're asking of us tonight?
Well, that's what the city manager's memo is.
What's the
and so-
deficiency? I mean,
That I don't have. Other than, like I said, reading between the lines, it says, to ensure that transportation matters are being adequately reviewed.
But
so,
but you guys, like I just said, your staff says, "Oh, we need to talk about this." Okay, then we talk about it and we discuss it. So if we're not adequately reviewing what's being talked about,
Sounds like you could read it two ways, right? One is that way, and the other one is things that are brought to us. Apparently, we're not reviewing in a some sort of holistic fashion to take everything into consideration. But there's never been any feedback on any of the direction that we've taken. So
I think a good example is the Lokes.
Yeah.
Lokes speed bumps.
The speed bumps, right? And we said, I asked Cedric, what were the did traffic go down? I heard it from somebody else as well on the commission. Did traffic go down? Did it serve a purpose? And I still haven't heard whether they were going to do a count of that area, but nobody's reported back to us what the impact of the speed humps were. And I know that Cedric, I think, did it before he left. They were counting the number of cars, because those are the things that would be interesting to know. That helps educate us as to what works, what doesn't work.
So it sounds like feedback from some of the recommendations you have made, and whether or not they have been successfully implemented, and if they resulted in the actual.
Yeah, San Antonio's another good, right? We've implemented traffic signals so that they can talk to each other, and
Did that happen?
it did. It's happened,
right.
yeah, and it seems to be traffic's flowing better in that intersection than it has before. I still have concerns on Main Street. Main and First is just a mess, and I don't know what is being done to address that. I can certainly keep bringing it up and saying we need to talk about it, but I know Cedric has said, because I watched, just like Mr. Wing, I am in the town and I look at things and watch for a while just to understand this doesn't look right.
Yeah.
I guess the question when you meet with the council liaisons is to find out what the deficiencies are, so that it doesn't matter whether it's in this commission or the other commission.
Right.
If we know what the deficiencies are, then that commission will address them.
I mean, go back to Ronit's comment, I wrote down the word irony as well, that when, the irony of PTC and I guess BPAC as well, supporting the police department's recommendation to allow them to make some changes per state law and therefore enforce speeding, and then council not supporting that. So, I mean, the police are the experts on that, and both the commissions, supported the police recommendation. So there's an irony there, whether maybe we don't believe our police department, but they said, here's how we can help traffic. You can raise the speed limit, and let me show you the studies that tell you it's not going to change the speeds, but will allow us to patrol. Again, that I know it's a big issue, but I think that probably, I'll speak for myself, but it probably represent the other commissioners. I think we're open to any process to do what's right. I mean, we're all up here because we're trying to do what's right for the city. So however we define it is fine.
I'm here for the paycheck.
You're here for the paycheck. You work for the chief. Huh?
I'm here to be on television.
And I'm sure there's pros and cons. Just like, having been on Design Review Commission, the analogy I'll make is I think it made sense to put all single-family stuff, including variances, together. Again, I wasn't on planning when it included variances, but putting all single-family stuff together, I think that works well. And maybe, traffic and transportation is the same way. But it would be good to make an evidence-based decision, and let's look at what the evidence is, and why not have the commissions talk about it? I mean, we had a joint study session with BPAC at some point in this past year that I've been, and that was a great, learned, discussion. So I think we should try to make an evidence-based decision. We'll all support whatever that is, but I don't know. We're a little puzzled about, what the problem is and what the evidence is. So we're happy to work with whatever needs doing.
You're here.
Okay.
Do you need a recommendation or something from us other than that, John?
No, I've got a list of things here that.
Well, one thing I'd like to point out that my experience in being on this commission has been that when we've had projects, commercial projects, part of it is we look at the traffic flows.
Well, you do.
And that, I don't see that going away, right?
No, it's not going to go away. It's part of
we have
part
to
of that project review.
because it impacts the design and impacts so much of what goes on.
The conditions that you look at, the mitigation measures that get evaluated and reviewed through the environmental process, all of that is very integral to what your job is.
Sally? John, do you have any indication from either of the council members that proposed this that they perceive that there's a load of work out there that's to be done and they think we're going to be too busy because of all these other things, like all that wonderful list that David sent out to us today?
I don't.
Okay.
I can.
Because that's the only other
share
thing
that
I
with
can,
them when we
Alex
meet
is
them.
speculating about why could they be thinking this. That's the only thing I can imagine is that they think that there's projects they want to have done or things they want to have done that they perceive we don't have time to do.
Or maybe they think we're not qualified. We're not engineers. Are the BPAC committee, are they more qualified? That it makes sense if they are, if they have.
I don't know what
Background.
their standards are, their qualifications, or their
guess we have
criteria
more
for
contact
selection.
We're all
there.
citizens, right?
Okay.
Well, we're open to do the right thing, and I think more information would help us figure out what that is, and we'd like to work together to figure it out. So, is that the kind of feedback you need? And
I think so.
Are we done with this agenda item then?
believe you are.
Move on.
Okay, so let's close that and look forward to wrapping it up on commissioners' reports and comments.
So I went to the last city council meeting. And there were a couple of things that I thought were very fascinating that involved, one was there was a lot of public comment on the historical districts and the fees associated with that. And so there was a group of people that really wanted the council to address it, but I didn't think it got agendized for a future meeting. Just that you guys were supposed to look at the code.
It's actually been agendized for the Historical Commission to take a look at.
Okay. Item 4 was about engineering and traffic survey, the speed limit. Council felt pretty much unanimously that was the wrong approach. What they would rather see, they didn't feel. Some people felt that there wasn't fully staffed in the traffic department in the police, so they couldn't enforce it if they did change it, then they would not have enough traffic officers to go after it. There's also was a feeling of...
Was the presentation the same by the
I
police officer?
wasn't here when...
Okay.
The police officer was not there. There was no police officer that I can remember that was there.
The first presentation to council, the officer was at that with Cedric to do the presentation and answer questions.
This one?
The one before that. When
Yeah, I wasn't there either.
The first time that the speed changes
It was
were...
discussed twice.
Right.
Got it.
Were recommended.
There was some... one of the council members brought up that the 2011 traffic calming measures haven't been implemented, and that they would rather see that done first before you bump the speeds up.
Are those on the same streets? I mean, we had 18, more than 18.
I don't know what the
streets that we
2011
got.
traffic calming measure says, but they wanted, essentially, one council member wanted to have that implemented before we start changing the speed limits to enforce it. That really the issue is calming. There was one comment by one council member at the end that was really fascinating, and that was somebody had taken a radar gun and had measured the speeds of the cars through every day of the week. What the report was that Saturdays and Sundays are when it's the highest, fastest possible speed. And when she said that, I said, oh, that's right, because there's so much traffic coming down that street, you can't go more than 30 miles an hour. There's just nowhere to go. But in the weekends, there's not many people on the street, and that's probably when there's people speeding, which means it's all residents. And if it's residents, then we're not talking about cut-through traffic. We're talking about people that live in neighborhoods who are going too fast down these streets, and to enforce it. Anyway, that were all the comments. And then the stop sign policy pretty much got adopted. There was some concern about stop signs in commercial areas. As was noted, Cedric is leaving. And the last item was the thing we just talked about, discussion of commission jurisdictions over transportation. And it seemed like there was somebody with a hidden agenda who's not one of our liaisons, who was deferring to the liaison. Like it almost felt like there was something going on behind the scenes that I wasn't privy to, but it just felt that way. That's all I can say is when I was watching it from the audience, one person was always prompting the other person to do something.
Let's go look at the tape.
You can watch the tape, and you can see and make your own conclusions. That was all that was talked about.
Okay, are we done with that meeting then?
Yeah.
Okay, the summary there. Did staff, did you want to mention the downtown visioning card you passed out?
Thank you for the opportunity. On Tuesday, April the 18th, from 5 to 7 p.m., maybe a little bit later, we're doing the kickoff meeting for the downtown visioning process. It's going to be taking place at Veterans Community Plaza at the corner of or intersection of Main Street and State Street, and we hope that you're all there to share your thoughts on the downtown. We're also going to be holding additional pop-up workshops. The first few will take place in the month of May. On May 4th, we're going to be at the Farmers Market from 4 till 8 p.m. May 17th in the morning, we're going to be at the Los Altos Main Library from 10 to 12. And then on May 17th, we're going to be at Grant Park Community Center from 1 to 4. Everyone is invited. And you can sign up at www.losaltos.gov Downtown Vision to receive additional information about the visioning process. And there is a website available. You can go online and click the link and find out what's taking place.
Great. Oh, I have a question about that, or does someone?
Was there a vote on the park? Oh, sorry. On the green, or is that a previous?
That happened at a previous meeting, and I don't know what happened.
It's the downsize.
That had been, discretion had been given to staff to make a decision about it, and staff made a decision.
Yeah, it's moving forward.
We 3rd Street between, yeah.
Right.
So it's larger than the space last year, but not
Smaller than what would have
parking
been.
lot that they had originally.
Would you like more information about the green? Find out
Now?
where, when? No?
I don't.
No, but
does
it-
anyone want more information about the green? I think it's in the paper and all that.
What
stuff.
I would, but I would like to remind everybody that the next Planning Commission, Transportation Commission meeting, we're going to be talking about the Loyola specific plan, and it starts at 6 o'clock.
Yes.
So make sure you bring all your information.
That's a continuation of the study session with City Council,
Correct.
as I understand it. Sorry.
Does that mean they sit up here and we sit down there and then we switch?
switch? Yeah. No, that's all right, yeah.
Or do we sit up here and they sit down there?
We're all.
No, the study session, as I understand it, goes as long as it goes, and then PTC starts after that. So not a hard stop at 7, if I
Right.
understood it correctly.
That's correct.
That's correct, okay.
And you've scheduled our other agenda items accordingly, I presume.
We will.
Yeah.
We've got a lot on your agenda for that meeting as well.
You
and
might want to
can go
think
until-
about that.
Well, that's why I
Yes.
thought it was
There will be
better.
public comments again?
No, I thought the public
I
comments.
thought the public comment had been closed. and
but-
It was indicated that the public comment had finished and that they were continuing.
But it was renoticed.
No, I'll,
Yeah.
No, you had it
Right,
right.
you
You're
got
on.
it on.
You're
You're
on.
on.
sorry.
You're good.
There was an attempt to continue it to a date certain, which would have meant no further public comment. However, that was not successful, and because the council and us were later polled as to our availability, then it was not continued to a date certain, and therefore there can again be public comment.
Does that mean it needs to be renoticed?
It's been.
It's being renoticed, yes.
Okay.
And it's going to be a long one.
It'll be a long one. We might want to lighten up the meeting agenda.
The agenda
if we can.
item, if there's
Yes.
anything you can push off
Yes,
to the
please.
following.
Okay.
Yeah. Back to the downtown visioning thing, I had a question about that. So I assume we obviously can participate as citizens rather than wearing our PTC hats. But, how, like, I avoid getting involved in next door conversations and all that stuff because I don't want any blurring. Do you actually recommend we participate in this as citizens or to stay away or, because we're
you have
certainly.
as much right to participate as citizens as everybody
As
else.
anybody does.
We just can't talk to each other.
We can just
Right.
talk to each other.
And
Okay.
Go
Oh,
sharing
that's
with each
true,
other
yeah.
your
Okay.
thoughts and ideas.
All right. Are there any other questions or comments on, or can I go ahead and adjourn this meeting? Yes.
Oh, I wanted to say, welcome to our newest member.
Yes. Oh, welcome, everybody. Yes. Yes,
Welcome.
yes.